Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereux in Baltimore. Ebola is all over the headlines in the United States. After 2 American healthcare workers were infected with the deadly virus in Liberia, more media outlets started to pay attention to this outbreak raging in the Western African nations of Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and now reports show that it spread to Nigeria. There is no proven treatment or vaccine for Ebola, which so far has infected more than 1,700 people and has killed more than 930 in West Africa. But what we do know is that those 2 American healthcare workers infected with Ebola are now back in the U.S. recovering and receiving an experimental serum known as ZMapp. According to the BBC, the World Health Organization will convene a meeting of medical ethics specialists next week to decide whether to approve experimental treatment for Ebola. Now joining us from New York to deconstruct the issues around the Ebola virus is our guest, Harriet Washington. Harriet is a medical ethicist and the author of the book Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present. And also she's the author of the book Deadly Monopolies, The Shocking Corporate Takeover of Life Itself and the Consequences for Your Health and Our Medical Future. Thanks for joining us, Harriet.
For having me.
So, Harriet, the big news is that this serum that is ZMapp that I mentioned in the introduction was offered to the 2 American healthcare workers, and now they seem to be recovering. Why hasn't it been made more available more widely available?
Well, what we're told is that it's not been made more widely available because there were initially only 3 doses. Of course, my first question was, why wasn't it given to Sheikh Umar Khan, the chief Ebola healthcare worker in Sierra Leone, who died just a week or so ago of Ebola?
Then at the root of this, would you say that the serum was, essentially, whose interest is it for it not to be more widely available?
Well, it's a very complex question, and I think I'm not inclined to personalize it. Rather than asking whether a person has an inclination to deny it to Africans, my question is, what forces tend to separate drugs like this from Africans? There are networks, informal networks sometimes of availability that are available to Westerners and not to Africans. And there are also economic pressures. Decisions about the expense of producing large enough quantity of doses of this drug to give it to Africans is an expensive proposition, as it always is. And that is a factor as well. There's a feeling that among some that it would be too expensive to produce for African Americans. But my point is, I always notice that they talk about the cost, but what they're actually referring to is the price. It's a manufacturer's decision to impose a certain price. And that is what puts it out of the reach of people in the developing world.
Yeah, and being out of reach for people in the developing world, I mean, there are going to be some real consequences. As I mentioned in the introduction, 1,700 people have been affected. More than 900 people have died from Ebola. So can we name some names here? Which kind of pharmaceutical companies are we talking about?
I'm not inclined to single them out by name because what's interesting about this is although most pharmaceutical companies are guilty of an economic mentality that tells them not to produce drugs for the needs of people in the developing world. An economist at Harvard, Michael Kramer, wrote some time ago about this tendency of pharmaceutical companies not to even test drugs for diseases of the tropical lands because people there, quote unquote, cannot afford them. In fact, if you look at the data, between 1975 and 1997, there were 1,233 drugs developed by pharmaceutical companies. Guess how many were intended for the use of people who lived in developing countries?
How many?
4.
Wow, only 4.
Decals. Context of White Supremacy. Justice Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of racism, white supremacy. Today's date, Monday, August 18th, 2014. So I have been told we will do our obligatory commentary on the events that have unfolded in Ferguson since, I guess, over the 24 hours since we last spoke. We will do that after we have wrapped up with our guests and what have you, so folks can pitch in and share what they have seen, observations and all that, National Guard being called in, important information to keep an eye on. At any rate, the audio clip that you heard right there, not the full interview, but a good dose of what's been reported right now. Also equally important, what's being reported about the quote-unquote Ebola outbreak on the continent. That was scholar, author Harriet Washington, black female. I think many folks are familiar with her first publication, Medical Apartheid. Outstanding scholarship that is very much in line with what we will be talking about today. I would highly encourage folks to check that book out if you have not read it. Might even be something that we should consider doing on one of our book clubs. She wrote the foreword to the book that we will be discussing today, which is Sentenced to Science, One Black Man's Story of Imprisonment in America. Fascinating text, and it pretty much builds on a previous work. The author will be joining us later in the broadcast. It builds on his original publication, Acres of Skin, Human Experiments at Holmesburg Prison. That originally came out in 1999. It is a fascinating text. I would definitely encourage folks to check it out. A lot of times when people talk about what they call the prison industrial complex and how so many black people end up being stuffed in cages, greater confinement, and this needs to change, particularly people being incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. I don't think people often talk about all of the nasty things that can happen once you end up being, as one of our guests, Jessica Pettit, said, one of those invisible persons, particularly a black person, all of the nasty things and how you can be compromised and taken advantage of. Just to give you a flavor, I'm just going to read the quick intro for the text that we're talking about today, again, Sentenced to Science. This is a quote in the foreword. It reads, "One of the nicest American scientists I know was heard to say, criminals in our penitentiaries are fine experimental material and much cheaper than chimpanzees." This was published in the British Medical Journal in January of 1963. Our first guest, unfortunately, was one of those black males who was tortured. I like to, be accurate and correct about the terms, subjected to, in my opinion, racist medical terrorism in the Pennsylvania prison system, Holmesburg Prison specifically. A myriad of dastardly acts were carried out on him. Fortunately, he survived it, but had lifelong difficulties as a result of what happened to him. He became aware once the book was published, Acres of Skin, and started sharing, talking about meeting in some of the groups that they had about this and bringing more attention to what happened to these folks during the 1950s, 60s, 70s in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. It didn't just happen there. Real pleasure to have him joining us live on the broadcast. Our first guest, Mr. Yusef Anthony. Mr. Anthony, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Outstanding. So glad to have you on the program. Just really appreciative that you could share a bit of your Monday evening. Anything you would like to share with our listening audience you think it would be important for them to know about you before we get started?
Yeah, the prison system was set up where, they was taking advantage of functional illiterate prisoners, coercing them to believe that the tests that they were putting us on was safe, But we found out later on that, they almost killed us. That's one of the points I like to bring out, And like when I first went into Holmesburg, you could only do, guys was doing like 40 years. But the year I went in 1964, they changed the system, made it a total county jail where you only could do 2 years. Anybody else had to get sent to the state. But the medical system was set up in there where they had the inmates performing tests on inmates. You know, the people from the University of Pennsylvania Hospital came up there and introduced the testers into the system to the Dr. Cleveland, Albert Cleveland. And, I mean, it just turned out to be a mess, you know, like I was on a test supposed to be by Johnson & Johnson's bubble bath test, where they said that they were going to, you know, put bubble bath on us. And I thought that test was safe, you know. But, like, when I went over on the block where they performed the tests at, what they did was went through a procedure of putting, did you ever see the cover of Acres of Skin?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, you see the guy sitting on the table with the 6 patches on his back?
Yes, sir.
Well, this is what they did to us. They put Scotch tape on our backs and pulled it off until it was a raw area, 6 raw areas on our back. And then they took gauze and they put the bubble bath directly on the raw area. And then they put tape over that. Now, the thing is that they pulled up a can and they sprayed it on my back. And when it hit my back, it was cold, real ice, and I could taste it in my mouth and everything. That's how toxic it was. And I asked the inmate, like, what is this for? You know, he said, this is to close the pores so that the tape will stick to the back, you know. So I said, well, all right, you know. He says, you can go back to the block. Tomorrow you come back over here and we'll inspect your back and apply a new set of bandages on your back. So when I went on to my block and I started walking towards the back, as I stepped into my cell, a vertigo hit me, and I fell out. And my 2 inmates ran over and helped me up on the bed. So I said, man, my back is on fire, you know. And I said, man, take these patches off my back. So one inmate said, if you take them off, they ain't gonna pay you, you know. And like they was only paying something like $30-something for the completion of the test. So the other cell partner said, well, look, I tell you what to do, man. I'm going to take them off and I'm going to stick them on the wall. He said, this is what a lot of inmates are doing, you know. So he took them off my back, put them on the wall, and he wiped my back off. But all night my back was on fire. The next morning I woke up, I had big pustular blisters on my back. So I goes back over there. And what they did was they took tweezers and busted each blister and reapplied the bubble bath on my back again. So when I went back to the block, I did the same thing. I took them off, but still, from the first time they put them on me, it had already taken effect into my system. And I do believe that they was doing 2 studies on me, you know, because Albert Cleveland, he's the one who invented the retinol A skin cream. And he was putting chemicals on the inmates and was making them break out. And like after I had went over there 3 times and had the patches put on my back, I just started breaking out all over my whole body. You know, I looked like I had German measles all over my whole body. From not, I don't think, the Johnson & Johnson bubble bath, but the stuff that was in that green can, because I used to work for Crown Can Company, and sometimes we used to do government lines, and this was an army green can with a list of chemicals in the solution that you couldn't hardly, because it's small print, you understand? But I seen certain words on there that was related to the chemicals that they were using for the retinol A thing, you know. Dr. Cleveland, they got thrown out of the jail for conducting that particular test. The chemical that they used, he put it on the inmates, and it didn't produce the acme. So what he did, he doubled the doses, something like 100 times stronger, until he got what he wanted, chloractomy, I think it was. And through that experiment is how he invented retin A. But I mean, once that chemical got in your system, you almost had cancer, you know. And in fact, a lot of the inmates that was on that gas then died from cancer. You know, this was back in 1964. Mm-hmm. So up until now, like we had a class action lawsuit against the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Cleveland, but the lawyer, he sold us out. You know, he sold us out. I think they paid him under the table because Dr. Cleveland, he had like 100 lawyers, and he never showed up for anything. He would always send a lawyer, and his whole thing was that we compensated the inmates for those tests, you know, like for what the suffering that I went through from those tests, you know. When I got released, and I was there in 64, and I got released in 66, from that point, my whole life has been sick call, you know. And in reference to the lawsuit, let me see. In reference to the lawsuit, it never went through, okay? We failed with that. I mean, we spent about 3 years on that. But we started out with something like 100 and something men on the class action lawsuit, and I think it's about 10 of us living now.
Wow. Everyone else has passed away?
Yeah, passed away from cancer. Wow. I got prostate cancer now. I got prostate cancer. I got hepatitis C. All the inmates that was on those tests that I know of that was in the class action lawsuit, all of us had hepatitis C.
Wow.
And I don't know how many of us died from cancer. You know what I mean? Everybody that was in that jail that was on those tests right now, you gotta pay them to go see a doctor, or they gotta be critically ill before they go to the doctor. They scare the doctors.
Wow.
This is a torment that my life has been like, and I could imagine what those other guys' life has turned out to be. You know, but that place was awful. And I mean, it was like a hellhole. If you go there, I was like real young when I went there, back to my 20s, and I'm 70 now. And I see some of my friends. They say this guy's still living, you know. And you know, my thing is that I got off of medication and I started using herbs and start eating properly, and I attribute that to my longevity. You know, because most of the guys that was on there, you know, they was just doing their thing, and whatever the after effects of those tests caught up with them, they just start dying off. Every time the chairman of our organization, Holmesburg Survivors, every time he would call me, he would tell me about somebody else that just died.
Wow.
You know, it's just been a torment. You know what I mean? And like as I was saying, Dr. Cleveland, when they found out the strength of the chemicals he put on the inmates to bring about the I'm trying to get that word, the chloractomy, they threw them out to jail. When they found out, they threw him out to jail. But guess what? About a year later, he comes right back into the jail with the help of the government.
I guess
now when he comes back in there, the Pentagon is backing him up, and he started performing mind expansion experiments, LSD, and all these different kind of drugs. And he built trailers in between blocks that had padded cells that they could put inmates in. You know? And like right now, most of the guys who were on those tests, you might find them laying downtown on grates. They don't even know how to come out the rain. That's how deteriorated their brains are.
Wow.
From the chemicals that they administered. You know, some of them tried to kill themselves in the jail, or either they became very violent and was attacking the guards and was attacking the other inmates. I mean, it was a hellhole. And I mean, a lot of people say, well, why did you keep getting on those tests? Like, I didn't have nobody sending me any money, and I was young. And the thing is that if you didn't have no money in Holmesburg, you was in trouble. You know, something that made you somewhat independent. Because if you become dependent on other inmates, they would ravish you. Mm-hmm. They would ravish you. That homosexual thing was running rapidly. And I didn't want to get caught up in that, so I got on tests so that I could make a little bit of money so I could go to the store, get my own cosmetics, you know, movie tickets, commissary, you know, the little treats that you would have in there, ice cream, chips, and stuff like that. Yeah. Other than that, guys who didn't have the opportunity, they were being messed over by the older inmates and turned into kids.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So to prevent that from happening is why my personal reason why I got on tests. I got on about, I think, 3 tests. The first one was the one where they put the Johnson & Johnson bubble bath.
Right.
And then I got on a diet test. And, like, my stomach, I could do 1,000 sit-ups, man, every day, and my stomach still looked bloated from the gastrointestinal problem that I'm suffering with this hepatitis C. You see what I'm saying? And I mean, you know, it's a shame how he came in there like the lawyer, not the lawyer, but the warden was in on the take of the money that they were making. They was making millions on us, millions of dollars on us, and they was paying us like $30, $20 a test and stuff like that. I got $20-something for the diet test. I got $30-something for the Johnson & Johnson bubble bath test, and then I got on a government test. Now, what they did on the government test was took us all over to a classroom, and they had a table. Everybody had seats at the table, and the guy who was running the tests, he gave us all some mathematical problems, you know, minor addition and subtraction. And you got 10 cents for every answer you got right. So he had a bell there. He said, now, when I ring this bell, y'all begin. So he rang the bell, and we started writing the numbers. All of a sudden, he rang the bell. He said, stop. He took and collected all the papers, and then he gave out the same papers again. He said, now, before y'all start doing this segment of the test, we want y'all to drink this liquid. And the liquid, it was like little shot cups. It had a tray of shot cups. So everybody had to get up and go over and get a shot cup and drink it. And so he said, well, we're going to basically do the same thing. And he rang the bell. He said, begin. Now, that stuff that he gave us, the first shot that he gave us, was so potent that I don't think I did three little answers. I was like looking all around. Everything was magnified. You know, man, what is wrong? You know, and some guys were standing up. Threw the pencil down and was standing up. So now I was one of the guys that I guess they would classify me as being weak or not subjected to with the second part of the test. The second part of the test, these guys were going to get paid $100. Okay? But what they did was took them and put them in the trailer. Now, me, he said, you don't have to come back. and a couple of other guys didn't have to come back. But that stuff had me so tricked up that I was scared of my shadow. You know, I was walking around the jail. They named me outer limits. I didn't have no conversations with nobody. I didn't want to mess with nobody. I was just spooked out. I was picking cigarette butts off the floor rather than to ask somebody for a cigarette. I got to the point I didn't know whether it was day or night. I didn't get no sleep. And this was like for weeks, man. And then I finally mellowed out. you know, and thank God I didn't go to OBS where they put guys that's nut out over there. You know, my homies that was on the block with me, they watched my back. You know, but that's how I got the name Outer Limits from that test. But the other guys, they went over to the trailers. Oh man, these guys was bugged out. They was bugged out. They were so bugged out when they came out them trailers that they had to wear a "Pay Me No Mind" sign on their shirt, so that the guards would know that these guys was on these tests, and they have to do anything, you know. And like I say, some guys tried to commit suicide and everything else after they went over there and got to mess with that LSD and other mind-expanding warfare chemicals, agents they was using. The Pentagon was experimenting with that kind of stuff on us, you know. They had cancer tests, every kind of test that you could think of in there, you know what I mean? And, like, you know, I'm just lucky that I went through it. After I got that third test, that was it for me. But now, I was suffering with the rash that I was telling you about, where I broke off from the Johnson & Johnson bubble bath test, and I had these bumps all over my body, man, and I was laying in the cell at night, and these joints would look like when the moon would come out, would draw on, cause agony and pain and itching to set in. And I would be laying at the bed, and the other inmates in the cell with me, they couldn't sleep because I was making so much noise. So what they do is that if it's an emergency on the block, they have a skeleton crew on at night once they lock all the inmates in, is that you put a flag out. And you do that by taking a sheet or a pillowcase and tie it to your window pole and stick it out the door. And the guard on the center is built like a wagon where he can walk around in the circle on the center and look up each block on the count, you know. And every night he would see that flag out of my cell. So he would come down with the male nurse, and the nurse, here he goes again. What's wrong, man? I said, man, this stuff is killing me, man. This stuff is killing me. And I went for like 3 weeks of torment like that, of them bringing me down just a little stronger than aspirin, like saccharin. They had a little sedative in it that would calm me down and make me be able to like rest a little. I couldn't sleep. But it took like 3 weeks before the people from the University of Pennsylvania was coming up to sponsor me the test to consider me, you know. And like one night I'm laying up in the bunk, and at night, like 2 o'clock, you know, a.m. and he comes down there and opened my door. I didn't know. I thought I was in trouble or something. He said, "Hey, what happened?" I said, "Yes." He says, would you like to come with me? And he takes me over on H block, which is the block they had converted to a hospital block where they could perform experiments. He takes me over there, man, and he looks at me and says, "Wow, you really messed up." So he said, "I want you to undress." And I undressed, and he laid me on a gurney, and he took 2 gallons of stuff smelled like vinegar, and he took a sponge, and he bathed me down with that. Then he went over to the safe and pulled out a hypodermic needle and a vial, and he drew up a shot, and he shot it into my body, and it was like I melted. All of that itching and stinging and pain that I was going through just melted away from me, you know. And I found out later on that this was vitamin A. Vitamin A from the experiment that Cleveland was doing to come up with retina A. That's why I think they did a blind study on me, you know, saying that I'm on Johnson & Johnson, but at the same time, they performed the second test on me when they sprayed that stuff on my back, you know. And eventually it all went away. But when I went home, It all came back. And I mean, when I say it came back, my hands swelled up like 8-ounce boxing gloves. My feet, I weighed 10 and a half. By the time they took me to the hospital, I couldn't get my foot in a 14 triple E. This is how swollen I was. My pus was running out my feet, pus was running out my hands, and my fingernails started growing like claws, real thick and curling, you know. And they wound up taking me to the hospital, the Pennsylvania hospital, not the Pennsylvania, but Philadelphia General. It's not there no more, you know. But they took me there. And when they brought me in the door, I didn't have no medical coverage or anything. My sister and another brother, because I was at the mosque. You know, I had went into the Islamic thing, and I was living in the mosque and everything. And this is when all this stuff happens. So I goes into, they take me to the hospital in a wheelchair. And when he takes me in, I didn't have no medical coverage. So the nurse is saying, well, you don't have no medical coverage. I don't think we're going to be able to admit you, you know. But so chance, the dermatologist came through a reception area, and he seen me. And he seen the shape I was in. I mean, I had turned gray. My skin had turned gray. My hands and feet all swollen up. And he told that lady, he told the nurse, he said, are you crazy? Get this man in here. You know, we'll deal with his medical coverage after he's admitted, you know. And they brought me in and took me up to the floor in the hospital. And they threw me in a tub of water. And 3 nurses came in there working on me. And they cut the palm of my hand at the wrist and pulled the skin off like a plastic glove. It looked like fatback. That's how pussy it was. And at my toes, they cut across there and pulled the whole sole of my foot off. You know, and then they painted my feet with betadine and all that kind of stuff. You know, and I was in there for about 3 weeks with them working on me. They was working on me. They didn't know what was wrong with it. They didn't know what was causing it. They had me down in the laboratory trying to find out what was in my system causing me to break out like that, you know. But it all came from those tests. You know what I mean? Yeah. Do you have any questions?
Absolutely. Again, Mr. Hornblum, who authored the book, he'll be with us later in the broadcast. But
yeah, I know he told me.
Okay. Just, I guess, to kind of rewind, number one, I think this is important. You said when you first entered the prison system, you were very young, in your early 20s. You were functionally illiterate. Is that correct?
That's it.
And that's
it.
Enabled them.
In fact, my cell partner used to have to help me write letters to my wife.
Wow.
Until I started learning how to do it myself.
Wow.
And I mean, they would take you. We would go into Holmesburg, and you have to go to quarantine, where you go and see the doctor, get shots, make sure you're well before they put you in population.
Mm-hmm. And
what they do is they bring you out of there into the classification area. Mm-hmm. And that's where they introduce the tests. And how they do it is that they coerce you. They tell you that, listen, in case there's some of you who don't have anybody at home that's caring about you sending any money up, or some of you have low bails, you know, these tests can benefit you. You know, they're safe tests. They've been through the thing where they've been tested and everything, and this is a way that you can make some money, you know. And that's what they did. They coerced you, and most of the guys that were there were functionally literate. You know, not just me, but most of the guys that was there. You almost got to be a functionally literate to be coming to jail anyway. But they take you in there, and they put you in population. And I looked up and got in the cell with 2 of my homies, older guys than me, but you know, they was there to watch my back. And like how they would introduce the tests after you get into population is that the guys who were the male nurses living on H block would come down the block with a truck to bring medication to certain inmates who were already on tests, and they had a billboard where, you know, he would take the name of new guys. He had a list of tests that was available, and he would have new guys sign up for these tests. And they came past my cell, and my cellie, he knew the guy who was a male nurse. He said, "Hey, Moose, listen, man, this is my homie, man. Hook him up on something decent." So he looked down the list, and he said, "Well, we got the Johnson & Johnson bubble bath test." And actually, I thought, you know, we were just going to put our hands in some bubble bath to see what it would do. But, you know, when I asked the inmates that was running the test, well, what is this do? He said, "So we're doing this. The reason why they stripped that first layer of skin off your back, so that when they put the bubble bath on there," he said, "this is to see that if someone was to use this product and they got into the bathtub and they had an open wound, to see if it might infect it or damage the area." You understand what I'm saying? And this is the reasons he gave to say that you know, this is why they're taking the skin off, you know. But then, you know, we had to sign what you call release form, you know. And when you read the release form, he says, whatever is to happen to you on this test, you cannot hold the University of Pennsylvania or Dr. Cleveland responsible for it. So I say, man, this sound like something might happen to me, man. And the guy said, no, it's cool. It's just a formality. You know what I mean? Everybody was signing up and everything. And, you know, like, my fingernails are still messed up. It's a picture of my hands in the book. It's the signs. It's a picture of my hands in there. But they look a lot better now because the swelling is no longer there, but my fingernails are still full of like a fungus type thing, you know. And I mean, I've been walking around since 1964 with my hands like that.
Wow.
You know? Yeah, and I mean, I used to get on the bus, and I had my fist balled up or was afraid to sit beside someone because I'm afraid they could go look at me and say, man, what does this guy got? You know what I mean?
Wow.
And I mean, I've been going through this since 1964, man. You know, it's very horrendous, you know.
I wanted to make sure I asked, because I thought this was when I first read about all this, I think about 7 years ago in Acres of Skin, and then I more recently read Sentence of Science, which is more focused on your experience. One of the things that really stood out to me, the racial aspect, that was, you know, obvious, but all of the homosexual activity, and you mentioned it briefly. I want to read one quick paragraph, and then I want you to just comment, I guess, keep it real with us about how much this was and how the experiments, how that helped promote a lot of this homosexual activity and raping of other inmates. But this is real quick on page 60. Let's see, this is on 62, page 62 of Sentence to Science, where you said, and this is your words, all direct quote, the sex stuff was deep. It created a whole lot of tension in the jail. I remember one time a guy got so scared from guys peeking at him in his cell, he just snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. Actually, I read that piece yesterday. I want to back up and give folks the better one. This is on page 61, where you said this homosexual thing was nasty. There were a lot of fights and blood being shed over homos and who belonged to who in the jail. Guys be yelling, "That's my homo. Stay the fuck away from her. Keep your fucking hands off of her." Guys would be pimping these guys, and some of these crazy motherfuckers would even fall in love with them. Violent fights would jump off over these homos. A lot of guys got stabbed because of this shit. You can't believe what went on, and right out in the open. One day I came out of my cell in the morning, and I see a line of guys standing in the corridor outside a cell like they're selling lottery tickets or something. There's about 10 of them standing by the cell door with a blanket over the entrance so you can't see inside. It's one of those mind your business things, but it didn't take long to figure out what was going on. They all got cigarettes in their hand, and they're ready to pay for service, you know, for sexual favors. They were doing this boy in there. I'll stop right there. Can you kind of give us some more of the details about how rampant this was?
Yeah, man, it was sickening, man. You know, I mean, and the thing is, man, when you in there, you're living that close to that kind of thing. You know, you living with a hope and a prayer that this don't never happen to you. You know, and this is a young guy, man. This guerrilla guy named Paul was pimping him. You know, and he would come out the cell and he would have a handkerchief in his back pocket, a white handkerchief, was to let all the inmates know that the boy was available. And they would line up and they would pay 3 packs to go in there to get fellatio and, you know, sodomy and hand jobs. You know, this young boy was in there doing 3 and 4 guys at a time, you know, until one day he snapped out. He snapped out and tried to kill that guy, you know, who was pimping him. You know, and I mean, it was frightening. And like the homosexual thing was so deep that the guards were participating. The guards were actually participating with having sex with the homos. Once they got them off the population block, on the block where the holding like people that scared, they would put them on D block. And this is the block where the hole was at, and where they kept obvious homos at. When if you came in the jail wearing lady clothes and stuff like that, and wigs and stuff, automatically you would be sent to that particular block. But the guys that was in the population that got scared, they would run out to the center and complain, and they would get put over on that block. You know, and the guards were. Certain guards were going over there having sex with them for offering them protection.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know what? I was over in New York City, incarcerated. So when me and my boy gets cut loose from the jail, we're he says, look, man, come on, man, I'm gonna go get some money, man. So I said, where? He takes me down Broadway. And we go up in the elevator over this movie theater into this office. And these 2 white guys, they are 2 dudes who do things against the penal system. They write articles, they got papers and stuff like that they've been printing about the illegal things that's going on within the system, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So my boy Butch, he goes up there. He already knew the guys. I didn't know them. So Butch goes in the room with one of them while I sit in the office. And the guy in the office that's still there with me, he said, were you at Holmesburg? I said, yeah, I was there. When was you there? I said, from 64 to 66. He says, I got something that might interest you. And he gives me this great big court manuscript of inmates that I didn't even know was that way. You understand? Names are all in there. Guards, you know. Guards was like captains,
mm-hmm.
sergeants. They got busted. One name was Abernathy. He got busted from captain to just a regular private guard working the center with opening the gates and stuff like that. Antonetti, that's his name, Italian dude. His name is in there because, like, some inmates, they went to court from so much sodomy going on in there, and they tried to bring cases against guards and other inmates who were taking advantage of them, you know. And like I said, I've seen names of people that I knew that I never even knew was into that kind of thing.
Wow.
You know, that's how rampant it was. That's how rampant it was. I mean, it's just a sickening thing thinking about it, you know.
And the experiments, just because people were getting a little bit of money, like $30, $40, that was contributing to this sexual rape.
This is what some of the things I've seen go down. Here's a young guy that the bandits got their eye on, and they had what they call on the block loan sharks. You know, you could go get a good bar. So when you go to the store, you pay 2 back for 1. You get a pack of cigarettes, you pay 2 back for 1. Box of cookies, 2 for 1. Potato chips, same thing. So guys get caught up with going and getting stuff from these loan sharks. And it's a certain time of the week where you fill out your commissary slip. And you put your commissary slip in, and then when it comes back, then you can go to the store and pay back all your loan sharks. These guys was taken because the guard even let them do that. In the guard room in front of each block, they would go in there and they would pull certain guys' commissary slips so that it would appear that the slip didn't come back. And when they come down, you know, with a paper with his name on it and how much he owes, say, well, where's my money, man? Where's my stuff, man? Well, I put it in the slip, man, but, you know, it didn't come back, man, you know. Say, man, you're going to have to do something, man. You're going to have to give me my money or something, you know. Next thing I know, they running in on it. They was doing stuff like that. And the guy had money on the books, and the slip came back, but the guards were letting these guerrillas go in there and take these guys' commissary slips so that it would appear that they didn't have intentions on paying them back what they had borrowed. This is one of the games they was doing on young guys, you know, to turn them out. Yeah, man.
Wow.
It was a savage situation.
Could this have been going on if the guards didn't allow it? Like, is this something that you all could have done, even if the guards said, you know, we're tired of all this. This is illegal. This is against regulations. We're going to put a stop to this. Is this something that the guards could have cracked down on if they wanted to?
Yeah, they could have cracked down on it and made it better. You know, but like I'm saying, here go one guy. He runs down to the guard. He runs down to the guard and say, man, I want to move out this cell I'm in, man. This guy trying to do something to me. And so he say, man, I ain't tell you to move back. The guard said, I ain't tell you to move back there. I've been trying to watch my back. Shit like that. This is how crazy they was, man. The guards was in on that stuff. I'm telling you, the guards had boys. The guards had boys. You know, Aginetti, he would come down to like say new guys that's coming in, and here's a young dude that catches his eye. He had four guys in the jail. They used to call them the 4 horsemen. They used to train all the guys to box and all this kind of stuff. Roll Reed and all these guys, the kind of guys. And he would he would tell them to turn the boy out for him.
Wow.
And they would turn them out, and then when they turn them out, they put them on that block, quarantine block. And he would come down and say, look, man, you know, if I want, I can put you back in population, and they're going to kill you over there, you know, because you usually have some nice looking little boy. But now if you do a favor for me, you know, I'll keep you over here and make sure you're taken care of. Stuff like that, man.
Wow.
That's what the guards was doing, man. Like I say, listen, they had that test, the tests that was coming in from the University of Pennsylvania, they didn't have drug raids from the potency of the pills, some of the pills that came in there. Like it got outside of the census. They had a pill that came through there that they call a yellow jacket.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it was made up of, but it was strong as morphine.
Wow.
And the guys that was on drugs got the inmates that was running the tests on H Block. They was selling hypodermic needles, and they was selling those pills to inmates, and the inmates in turn was selling to the other inmates. It got so out of hand that Ferguson Vice Squad had to come into jail. Ferguson's Vice Squad had to come into the jail. And what they did, they cut off all the water so you couldn't flush nothing in the toilet. And they had the guards walking the roof because the windows opened up on the roof. They had guards working the roof, and guys was trying to throw stuff out of the windows, and the guard was seated. The number of the cell was right on the window, and they were going there. And most of them guys, that after the raid, they got shipped to the penitentiary.
Wow.
they got an extra 5 years put on them, man, for those pills. And also, like on the holidays, they were selling grain alcohol, the alcohol you soak medical sterilizing instruments in.
Wow.
They were for a baby jar full of that alcohol with a can of orange juice. You pay 3 packs. And the inmates was getting so drunk that the guards, when the yard was out, the guards had to come out and carry inmates in. That's how drunk they was out in the yard.
Wow.
Yeah, man, they didn't care, man. We was throwaways. We were throwaways in there.
And this predominantly black population?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was some whites and Puerto Ricans, you know. Some of them was on tests. The only ones that didn't get on tests was the black Muslims.
Mm. Wow.
I don't know if you ever heard of him, Sam Sadine. Him and his crew, they did not mess with those tests. And at the time, I wasn't involved with Islam. You know, I was just young and dumb trying to survive.
Wow.
You know, yeah, man. And I mean, you know, it was a critical situation. And I got pins in my feet, you know, and my hands. You know, every now and then it get to the point I can't even ball my fists up.
Wow.
But like I said, I've been taking certain herbs, and I've been eating certain natural foods. You know what I mean? And this is what's been carrying me through. You know, my whole life has been a wreck from that stuff in there, man. You know, and then on top of it, we get the class action lawsuit on, and the daggone lawyer sells us out.
Mm-hmm.
He sells us out. He went from the lower court all the way up to the Supreme Court. And then when he got to the Supreme Court and he filed the suit for us, he put the wrong docket numbers.
Mm.
He put the wrong docket numbers. So they threw it out from because of the statute of limitations, number one. And that by him being a lawyer, he's supposed to know what he's doing. Like the judge said, I got to do my job. He has to do his job. You know? So they threw it out.
Wow.
So the chairman of our organization, Holmesburg Survivors, he stepped to the judge and said, well, is there any kind of way we might be able to have a comeback or something like that, or appeal it or something like that? He said, listen, man, in order for you to appeal, the trouble you got to go through, it ain't even worth it. You know, he said you have to go and get another lawyer to take your case pro bono. Then you got to sue the lawyer you had. And then you might stand a chance to come back before us. You understand? And see, how we got the class action lawsuit is that we found out that, you know, you only have 2 years to file a complaint. But they have a law out called law of discovery. If you don't know the medical department has taken advantage of you, and then you find out 6, 7, 8, 10 years later, well, from that time, for another 2-year extension is extended to you. And that's what we was trying to rumble with, you know, the rule of discovery. But like I said, when we went in front of this judge, the Supreme Judge, he threw it out, man, and he ruled in the favor of the University of Pennsylvania and the dermatology department, Dr. Albert Cleveland, you know. So the only way I've been getting some kind of compensation from this is like Mr. Hornblum has been taking me around to certain colleges, medical places and stuff like that, and I speak, and I get 100 here, 500, 1,000 here, you know, like that. I get, you know, little something, man. It's not nothing that's going to carry over. As soon as you come home, you can split that. You know, if we had got the class action lawsuit, we could have had some money to be able to be functional here. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like right now, I can't work. My body's so tore up, I can't work. I ain't worked in years. And then when I did work, I had to work under the table. You know? We don't get no recognition for it. That's how sick I've been, man. You know? And like I can't sleep. I have insomnia. You know, my joints hurting all the time. My feet is all messed up. I got treated for cancer, man. And when I got treated for cancer, the foot that I got the pin in, they hit me with so much radiation that night when I laid down to go to sleep. I stopped breathing. And when I jumped up, I was nauseated, man. And I tried to run to the bathroom to throw up and felt like somebody hit me in the dark. And I broke my foot straight across. You know? Yeah, you know, it's just been a struggle, man. A heck of a struggle. And, you know, I wish I had never had to go through this, man, but I am, man, you know. Yes, sir.
Wow. Context of White Supremacy. We're going to bring Mr. Hornblum in a minute. I just want to give anybody that's listening in, if you have a question you would like to ask Mr. Anthony before we bring in Mr. Hornblum, who wrote this book as well as Acres of Skin, the number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you have a question you would like to ask Mr. Anthony before we bring Mr. Hornblum into the discussion to get more details. The person that dialed in, last 4 digits, 1184. If you can be concise and get right to it with your question, that would be super appreciated. 1184, did you have a question for Mr. Anthony?
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. What was the pressure that was going on that was causing, if you in a word, what was the pressure going on that that was making all this sexual devastation go on?
Well, like I said, when I first went through the jail, the inmates was doing time like almost 20 to 40, stuff like that, 5 to 10, long sentences, you know, and a lot of guys come through. They look fair. They young and stuff like that. And these older guys, they ain't seen a woman in so long, you know, they had that lust thing, and they would try to turn these young guys out, man, you know. And as far as the guards are concerned, it was involved in that kind of stuff, man. It just was corrupt guards. The whole system, the whole penal system was corrupt.
Was the guards doing it too?
The guards was having sex with the guys. In fact, the guards would tell the rough guys, the tough guys that was in the jail, if he seen a young boy come through there that he desired, he would have them rough him up.
For the guards?
How I got,
For the guards?
Yeah, man. It was sickening.
Wow.
It was sickening, man. You know, this was back in 1964.
What kind of crime was they put jail for like that, though?
The prison system since then have changed a lot. You can't smoke in jail no more, and it's like a boot camp thing now. But back then, it was wide open wild.
So this lasted up until what, the 80s or the 90s? This lasted up until what, like 70, 79 or something like that?
Let me see. I think when they start taking it to the courts, it was back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, you know. Like I think I was in New York in 71 when I got a chance to read the documents from the court with people's names, guards, and everything who was involved up there. And I mean, it just shook me out, man. You know. And I was like fortunate, man. I had old heads that was in the jail that came from my neighborhood. They looked out for me. But if you
came up in there as a young boy? You came up in there as a young boy?
Say that again?
You came up in there as a young boy?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, not young. I was like 20, like in my 20s.
Okay.
And these guys here, you know, like one guy from down my neighborhood, he was doing 20 to 40. Brother Donaldson for a big-time drug dealer, you know? And, I mean, he didn't been in there for like all these years.
What was the major drugs they were selling there, yo?
Heroin.
Wow. And that was Vietnam time, too, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I mean, the pressure is still in the jails. In fact, I went to Washington, D.C. with Alan Hornblum to talk to the Medical Board of Ethics. They still trying to bring Texas back after they got them thrown out. They threw the Texas out back in 1970, I think, 6. They stopped all tests. They put Albert Cleveland and the University of Pennsylvania out there no more testing, but so many inmates were being damaged. You know, and here it is. So, like in the 80s, we go to Washington to speak to the panel at the Medical Board of Ethics, and they trying to come back in there. And even though, you know, they got the jail more under control, but still the homosexual thing is running wild. They got doctors going in there trying to get inmates on furin who has liver damage.
It sounds like a whole bunch of people trying to hide
people who got AIDS, they're trying to bring the AIDS medicine in there because still the homosexual thing is running around.
What year was that?
This is now.
Right.
This is now. Even though they have it more under control, you understand? It's still jumping off.
It's still doing it.
You got inmates that come in there that's got HIV. Okay? And so
they're still doing it. They're just doing it more craftily now. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I said, you can't even buy cigarettes in jail. But they get them in there. And see, when I talk to those people, when I talk to the people in front of the Board of Ethics, I told them, I said, hey, man, I'm totally against y'all going back up there for anything because the whole penal system is corrupt.
And now you're talking to these people's kids. You know what I mean?
Man, let me tell you something, brother. Let me tell you something. Wow. They had a thing where the guards, the inmates had guards, hostages, and gratifiers. They had guns. They had guns in the jail. They got every drug that you can think of on the street in jail. They got inmates walking around with $1,000 in their pocket. You understand? And what's so bad about it? You living close with that stuff. You know, you living close enough. It ain't a thing where it's happening over here. You can move or walk around the corner or something like that. You had to deal with it every day. So that kind of stress and tension, like, you know, you being detained under tension, that's what it is, man. It's like living in invisible fire every day. It ain't no real, if you got brains, unless you're crazy, you don't feel the tension. But if you got any kind of sense or morals in your life, you feel it every day.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how deep it was in there, man. So, you know, this is how I got involved with Texas, man, so I could have some type of independence. So I didn't have to depend upon other inmates. Other than my two homies, my cellies, you know. Yeah, it was deep, man. And then they got cells for one person. They got 3 men living in the cell on top of each other. You know, the toilet in the cell, the sink in the cell. Oh man, it's deep. It's deep, man. I'm lucky to get out of there with a little bit of sanity. You know, because like I say, the University of Pennsylvania brought people in there from the Pentagon, and they start performing tests using chemical warfare agents on inmates, LSD and all that stuff, mind expansion drugs. And half of those guys that were on the test, they ain't recover.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to go ahead and add Mr. Hornblum into the discussion, see why he began all this in the first place. Mr. Anthony will be hanging with us while we have Mr. Hornblum on, and people that are listening in, if you all have questions that you want to ask, feel free. You can chime in. We'll get your questions in as we roll. I will go ahead and add the author of these two texts. I will add him on with us right now. You have to excuse the ring. Shouldn't take too long.
Hello?
Greetings, Mr. Hornblum.
Yes, sir.
Greetings. This is Gus. We are live on the radio broadcast with Mr. Anthony. We're so glad to have you with us this evening.
Very good. Pleased to join you.
Outstanding. For folks who are listening in, this might be your first time. You're not familiar with Acres of Skin or the book we've been discussing this evening, Sentenced to Science. The author of both of those texts, which I would highly encourage folks to check out, read, very important, particularly the whole context of what's happening around Ebola. Our guest, Mr. Alan M. Hornblum, his research focus, he has been on policy. His policy and research interests include exploited and focusing on individuals who've been exploited, leveling the political and economic playing field. His passion for revealing social inequalities and instances of outright abuse resulted in his leaving his position in the sheriff's office to research and chronicle the history of the Holmesburg Prison medical experiments, which he had personally witnessed earlier in his career. Again, Acres of Skin, Sentenced to Science. And I know folks are familiar, if you listen to this program, are familiar with Harriet Washington, her outstanding scholarship. Again, she wrote the foreword for Sentenced to Science. Excellent material. For folks who haven't seen you, Mr. Hornblum, you are a white man, is that correct?
That is correct. Has been all my life.
Right on. Folks might ask, since these two books seem to focus a lot around these black prisoners being abused. It wasn't exclusively black males, but it was certainly the preponderance of the subjects in these quote-unquote tests were black males. Why would you, a white man, why would you be interested in this subject matter?
Well, there's a good bit of history there, and part of it is personal in the sense that I started working in the Philadelphia prisons in the early 1970s. I was fairly young, just out of graduate school. Had planned on going to the Peace Corps, but there were some family situations that prevented that, so I thought I would do something or attempt to do something worthwhile, maybe not in the developing or third world, but in America. So I thought I'd work in the prison system, and that was my introduction to a big city jail. And on walking into the Philly prisons that first day in 1971, there were a lot of shocking, disturbing things that I witnessed. One of them was the fact that there were dozens and dozens of inmates walking around with adhesive tape and bandages and all sorts of medical tape on them. And I could imagine what was going on with that. And the next day, while on A block at the detention center, I asked the guard, what's the story? Is this place that unsafe? Is this some knife fights in the prison yard or a gang war on a cell block? And the guard just laughed at me and said, "Oh, no, Mr. Hornblum, that's the perfume test for the University of Pennsylvania." And I, like your listeners, was very much taken aback by that comment and continued to press him on that for the next 20 minutes or so. And what he described to me was the fact that for nearly 20 years or so, the Philly prison systems was home to one of the largest, probably the largest, clinical trial program in America, where the University of Pennsylvania, through a very prominent dermatologist, Albert Kligman, was using the prisoners as test subjects, as cheap and available raw material for experimentation. He was doing everything imaginable, testing new products, testing phase 1 drugs, testing new scientific theories. A good number of prisoners were on the tests. It's not that they were interested in advancing medicine or advancing science. It's not that they were patriotic. Their motivation was the fact that it was the only way to make money in the prison. If you were lucky enough to get a job pushing the broom on a cell block, you may make 15, 25 cents a day. But as a guinea pig, you could make $1 a day, $1.50 a day. depending upon the protocol that you were on. And one of the things that's very common in prisons that is the vast majority of the inmates are poor, and they can't make bail, and they're desperate for money, whether to buy something in the commissary or to pay their attorney or to pay their bail or to send to their wife or girlfriend. This was a way to earn money. So there was no desperate need to find subjects on the street or on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, because Dr. Kligman and Penn had tapped into an unlimited resource. The prison system held back in those days about 4,000 inmates or so, and I'd say anywhere from 60 to 80% or so were very willing to put themselves up for experimentation. As they would tell me, they were selling a piece of their skin, and the money that they got from it would buy items in the commissary or to pay their bail or whatever it was. And I watched this for many days. I questioned a lot of the employees. They had no problems with it. I questioned the inmates, and a lot of the inmates were sometimes fearful, concerned. A lot of them talked about the rashes, about the burns, about the problems of being on a test, but most of them were willing to do it because it was the only way to earn any money. And that was the system that actually ran in the Philly prisons from approximately 1951 to 1974.
Wow. What is your response for people who might say, well, these folks, we're not talking about angels. These folks, they've committed a crime. You don't go to prison because you've done well, you've done something wrong. They had informed consent. These people knew what they were getting into. We don't really, this is not something that should warrant a great deal of sympathy. Not that Kligman and company did something wrong, but this shouldn't warrant a great deal of sympathy. I mean, we are talking about inmates, right?
Right. Your question is very well taken, and there's no doubt there's probably a good portion of the American society that has no problem with such an operation. But in point of fact, the inmates were not apprised. They were not told all of the time what they were being exposed to, what they were being injected with, what they were swallowing. In many cases, the most serious undertakings, the most dangerous chemicals and protocols, the inmates were lied to and they were deceived. For example, inmates were given radioactive isotopes. They were injected with radioactive isotopes. None of the inmates were ever told about that. But there were so many things going on that did concern injections that they felt this is just some innocuous little initiative, and I'm making $30 a month, $45 a month, I'll put up with it. When in fact, they were in the mid-1960s being injected with radioactive isotopes. That was not anything that was ever illuminated by Dr. Kligman or Penn or the government. It was basically a secret initiative on the part of Dr. Kligman, and I only discovered it because I did a full court press for as many documents as I could using the Freedom of Information Act. So that's one example. Another example concerns also experiments initiated around 1963. It really emanates back in Midland, Michigan during that time, where doctors at Dow Chemical are doing experiments on basically a herbicide. They're making a product for the farm and agricultural community, and all of a sudden they start seeing a good many of their employees coming down with chloracne, very distinctive rashes of blackheads and pimples, to the point that there's a work stoppage. The union gets involved, and they decide that one of these plants, one particular structure, is unsafe. There's something in the atmosphere or what the employees are dealing with that is causing the problem, and they tell the administration of Dow, we are not going back in that structure until you figure out what the problem is and rectify it. Well, Dow had some good scientists, and almost immediately they theorized what the problem was. An offshoot, a byproduct of this herbicide, is something that we all know today and something that we all flee from. We know it's very dangerous, and that's dioxin. And the Dow scientists decide they'll do an experiment. They put dioxin on the ears of rabbits to see what the result would be. And lo and behold, the result is pimples and blackheads, confirming what they had theorized. However, with all of these operations, they wanted the real deal. And the real deal means humans. They don't want to test rabbits. They don't want to test pigs. They don't want to test monkeys or sheep or cattle. They want to test humans. And back during the Cold War era, one thing the Philly prison became known for was human experiments. If you were in the private sector or the public sector, I mean a corporation or the U.S. Army, and you wanted to test something dangerous on humans, you knew where to go. You knew to come to Philly, contact Dr. Kligman at Penn, and if you provided the right motivation, meaning money, he would do the experiment. And so that's what happened in 1963, 4, and 5. A deal was struck between Kligman and Dow Chemical, and as far as I know to this day, it's the only example of humans in America being purposely tested with dioxin. And that is an example, getting back to your introduction, where the test subjects were overwhelmingly African American. Very high percentage of blacks were incorporated in that study. And once again, they were never told what they were being tested with, what was being applied to their faces and backs. And I could go into greater depth on this, but you may not want it. But the bottom line is that 5 or 6 dozen inmates in the Philly system had dioxin purposefully applied to them. And yes, they did ultimately come down with rashes and pimples and blackheads.
Wow. Context of white supremacy. You don't make this point as much in the Sentence to Science book because it's more focused on Mr. Anthony, who's with us. But in Acres of Skin, something that I really appreciated, and I bring this point up all the time when I talk about racism as a system and as a power dynamic, where you have a group of people who have a lot more power, who are in control and can dominate what's going to happen to another group of people in any area of people activity. The idea of voluntary consent. I talk about this all the time, and that was a point that you raised, I thought, as a central theme in Acres of Skin, to say, well, wait a minute, you've got prisoners, and you can say, well, okay, hey, we gave them the form. We told them, you're doing this study. It's voluntary. You know what it is. You don't have to participate. We didn't twist their arm and demand that they go down and do these studies. And we told them that you can't hold us, responsible if something should go awry in these studies. Right. And I thought you make a just phenomenal point of saying that is not quite the case. You can't really say that these folks are giving voluntary consent in this vulnerable position. Can you just elaborate?
Yeah, I stress that because it is a very key central element of any discussion on human experimentation, certainly over the course of this country's history during the 20th century. And that there are various schools of thought on this, but I buy into the school of thought that basically is consistent with the Nuremberg Code, the code that American jurists wrote in the aftermath of the Second World War, when we put the Nazi doctors on trial in 1946 and 47, those jurists came down with a body of 10 principles, and the first one is very important. And as I read it, it basically says that if you are in a confined, coercive environment, you should not be used as a test subject. In other words, if you don't have free will, if you can't walk out of that facility, you should not be used as a test subject, because it smacks of very much what we were trying to prevent and what we were using the justice system to underscore with the Nazi doctors. They used all of these incarcerated, imprisoned people in concentration camps for some horrendous experiments. And we put those 23 doctors and medical administrators on trial. We harangued them. We lectured them. We told them how you do real medicine and research. We eventually executed 7 of them. Many others got long prison sentences. And we came down with these 10 principles known as the Nuremberg Code. And that first principle, the longest and most detailed, basically says if you are in a confined, coercive environment and do not have free will, as you are if you're in a jail or prison in America, you should not be used as a test subject. So that is what I buy into. I think it's about the best code that we or anybody else has ever formulated. And it is just a sad travesty that we, the country that wrote it, was very, very slow to buy into it.
You, unless I misread, you include in your writings that some of these white doctors who are running these studies, when asked, hey, is this what you all are doing? Is this in violation of the Nuremberg Code? Some of these white doctors said, well, I'm not really familiar with that doctrine. Is that correct?
That is correct. Many doctors did voice ignorance. Some of them may have been lying or deceiving, but others may have been telling the truth. And what I mean by that is I think that Nuremberg Code may get more commentary and play today than it did back at the time when it was written, or the early mid-1950s. Today there's more concern about medical ethics and how you treat people and how you do things. But if you look at our history, as my 3 books have tried to underscore, the last one coming out last year called Against Their Will, that I wrote in conjunction with Judy Newman and Greg Dober, that was focusing on the history of using institutionalized children as guinea pigs for medical experiments during the 20th century. There is a long, sad history of the best and brightest in America using the least and most vulnerable as raw material for experimentation. Believe me, it was not just blacks. It was not just poor inner city blacks that were used as guinea pigs. This country has a history of using all sorts of individuals and groups that were vulnerable, that were weak, that were uneducated, that did not have connections, that did not have family, did not have people of wealth. Doctors knew where to go to do large-scale clinical trials. Acres of Skin and Sentence to Science focuses on prisoners being used. Against Their Will focuses on children being used. But as you mentioned, Harriet Washington wrote her book dealing with the history of blacks being used. Other books, such as the Plutonian Files, talk about radioactive experiments, and there are some other good books, such as Bad Blood, about the syphilis studies down in Macon County, Alabama. So over the course of the last 15, 20 years, there have been other scholars, historians like myself who have tackled some of this, have tried to open up the eyes and brains of people who thought these things only happened in Nazi Germany. But unfortunately, a lot of really nasty, regrettable things happened here as well.
Context of White Supremacy. Our guest, Mr. Alan M. Hornblum, Mr. Yusef Anthony. Great to have both of them with us on the broadcast. Mr. Hornblum, one of the other things that really stood out to me, I think it was one of the first sources when I was going through the footnotes and reading Acres of Skin and checking out some of the other books that you cited and putting your project together. One of the first books that I went to track down when I finished your book was Male Rape by Anthony M. Scacco. Hope I'm saying his last name correctly. Where you, in Acres of Skin, where you talk about, and this is a pretty significant chunk of Sentence to Science as well, where you talk about the homosexual activity. We heard I think Mr. Anthony gave us great insight on that today as well. But you just talking about how these experiments helped promote this activity because it was putting money in the hands of some of the inmates, and they could then in turn use that to bribe guards or pay people for sexual favors or whatever. But there's a report in Mr. Scacco's book, Male Rape, and it's Racial Factors in Prison Homosexuality. Just for nothing else, that article alone I think is worth folks checking out. But just can you comment on the research that you saw and how this played out in terms of, really in my opinion, I could be wrong, but in my view it is encouraging, promoting this sort of sexual deviance and raping other inmates?
Well, I'm a little bit remiss in that I am not familiar with that book or the author's work, but yes, there was allegations that the medical experiments were fostering some problematic sexual behavior on the part of inmates in detention center and Holmesburg Prison. And that was in 1968, an investigation took place that showed that many of the inmates in the prison as well as in the sheriff's vans taking the prisoners from the prison to court in City Hall in downtown Philadelphia, that they were being attacked on a regular basis. And once they started doing further investigations, it was determined that one of the inmate operatives, in other words, one of the inmates who worked with Dr. Kligman in recruiting other inmates to sign up as test subjects, was encouraging inmates to sign up. He would put them on good experiments that presumably would not harm them, that they would get paid better. But he also pressured inmates that they would get more money, or he could help them if they would succumb to his sexual needs and desires, and that there was a lot of this taking place at that time. It became somewhat of a scandal in the prison because this was getting a lot of publicity in the city media. What's ironic about it is that this investigation that got a lot of ink talked about the sexual crimes, talked about the medical experiments, but quite frankly, I'm not sure either of those things stopped at that point. In point of fact, the experiments didn't take place and stop until 1974, and the sexual attacks probably go on to this day. I don't know how the numbers compare today to what was happening in the 60s, 70s, or 80s. My thrust and emphasis was on the medical side and how medical science and research were abusing and taking advantage of the incarcerated. I was not focusing on the sexual aspect. But since you mentioned the book, I probably will have to take a look at it now.
It is fascinating. I think and I got it from your work. I had never heard of this before. It was reading in the footnotes. You do have in the footnotes for Acres of Skin, Alan J. Davis's report, Sexual Assault.
Yeah, Alan J. Davis was a city solicitor, and he was the one who was assigned to do the investigation. And it put some very unfavorable light on Dr. Kligman, the University of Pennsylvania, and how that whole large research operation was corrupting the system, that things were taking place that should not take place. They didn't even get into the fact that experiments were taking place that were really putting the inmates, behind the crosshairs of something that could do them serious ill, being injected with radioactive isotopes, all sorts of chemical warfare agents, things like that. So that investigation, as much press and publicity that it received, was still superficial. But that is something that I recognized when I was there in the early 70s, that this program was really a recipe for, if not disaster, at least abuse, because the doctors roamed the prison with their white lab coats and PhD and MD after their name. They were coming from the preeminent school in the Philadelphia area, Ivy League University of Pennsylvania. And who were they dealing with? They're dealing with prisoners, folks that are overwhelmingly unschooled, unsophisticated, a majority black population, guys desperate for money. And so that was a recipe for abuse. And a lot of guys were abused. And I met Edward Anthony, Yusef Anthony, in the aftermath of the book coming out, as I did many of these men who seemed to come out of the woodwork once the book got all the publicity that it did, and they started to meet initially as a self-help group, because this was the first time many of them were actually learning what was in those vials, what was in that food, what was in those pills. They never really knew. And so it was a practice that never should have been initiated. And it really is something that smacks of what the Nazi doctors were doing. Granted, it wasn't nearly as violent and dangerous. They weren't outright severing limbs and killing people and things like that. But in America, the country that put the Nazi doctors on trial should not have been the one that was using, blacks in Tuskegee, using prisoners in Holmesburg, Philadelphia, using children at different institutions around the country. That is something we should not have done, and it's really the dark underbelly of American medicine.
You talk a great deal, I think Mr. Anthony did as well, about Albert Kligman, the kind of head honcho white male in charge of all of this, who made a lot of money in doing all of these quote-unquote experiments, really, in my opinion, terrorizing this predominantly black prison population. You have the chapter, one of the last chapters in Sentenced to Science, trying to get a little justice. You all talk about how Mr. Kligman, this guy is still getting awards at the time anyway, was still getting awards and being praised for his contributions to science. And in reading that, you all also talk about Mr. Anthony and others going to picket and protest what this guy, why are we celebrating this guy? It reminded me so much of one of the very first chapters in Medical Apartheid, where Miss Washington, she talks about the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, and this guy taking black slaves and experimenting on them. Just comment on that continuum of these white individuals.
Well, Harriet Washington was familiar with my book, Acres of Skin. She came to Philadelphia 2 or 3 times where she met Yusef Anthony and other men, and her chapter on caged guinea pigs is mostly from my book, Acres of Skin. And when she writes about Sims, and his contributions to science, if I can use that expression, that goes back to the Civil War, post-Civil War period. Kligman at Penn, we're talking about something going on 100 years after that. Kligman is functioning from the 50s into the 70s, when we never should have been doing this. But it just goes to show how lax the medical community was with regard to rules of ethics and how you treat people and what you do and what you don't do. And Albert Kligman is one of the best examples of doctors who had all sorts of entrepreneurial ambitions that he was able to act on very successfully. And when he walked into Holmesburg Prison in 1951, and he saw all of these men walking around, aimless, not going anywhere, unsophisticated, with no great connections to the real world, he said these men represented acres of skin that could be used for his dermatological experiments. And that's what he did every day of every year during that quarter century. Anything that popped into his head, he was able to get away with. Did not have to go to anybody for any green light. He basically had the operation to himself, never a contract signed, basically just a handshake between him and the superintendent back in 1951-52. And very quickly, word got out, whether it was R.J. Mills in North Carolina who wanted to do a tobacco cancer study, whether it was the Army's Chemical Corps that wanted to do some chemical warfare agent trials, whether it was Dow Chemical in Michigan, they knew where to go because Kligman was writing articles, he was writing pieces in medical journals, and word quickly got out that there was a significant dermatologist at an Ivy League school in Philadelphia who had the run of a large urban prison, and if you had the money to back up your protocol, you could have it tested there. And so that's what went on for a very long time, and I believe it should be an embarrassment to that Ivy League school, to the city of Philadelphia, and to everybody else that had a role in it, from the social workers and guards in the prison who saw it and told me they would never do it themselves, but these inmates are crazy, they're desperate for money, to the big shots, to the members of Philadelphia City Council, to the mayors, to the doctors at the University of Pennsylvania, to the administrators of the school. They basically decided to take the money and run. And it's just a horrendous piece of American medical history that something this large went on for so long. And it just goes to show you, when I give lectures at universities and med schools, that those prison walls not only keep the prisoners in, they keep the public out. So everyone should have a healthy streak of skepticism and stay vigilant.
Absolutely. I guess, given what you just said, and for listeners, I think you mentioned the book Bad Blood, James Jones, on what happened in the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. We've had Mr. Jones, Professor Jones, as a guest on the program as well. Given what you just shared, and that Tuskegee, quote-unquote, study, that was going on while this was happening as well.
That's right. Tuskegee and Holmesburg are the flip side of each other. What I mean by that is this. In Tuskegee, you had sick men, exclusively black, who were sick and went untreated, purposefully untreated. At Holmesburg, you had inmates, for the most part healthy, who you incorporated in medical trials and on many occasions got them sick and ill. And if folks would read Sentence to Science or heard what Yusuf had to say on your show, you know that he's an example of, guys really being put through the mill and having some horrendous stories to tell.
What would your commentary then be with what's being reported right now about the Ebola outbreak on the continent? There have been many, many reports where they've said that a part of this problem is that many of the black people on the continent, they are suspicious of these white doctors, white scientists coming in, talking about this disease that they don't really understand and offering a serum or whatever other remedies and saying that we're suspicious, we don't trust you. What is your commentary, and particularly given Harriet Washington has also had her thoughts on how this is playing out? What are
you don't have to go to Freetown or Monrovia, Sierra Leone or Liberia to find blacks who are cautious, skeptical about doctors and hospitals. You can find that anywhere in America. And that skepticism, that cynicism, that fear is because there are so many unfortunate examples where blacks were used and abused as test subjects. That Tuskegee study not only affected the 399 black sharecroppers, but just think all of their family members who were exposed to it. These men were having relations with their wives and girlfriends, and you don't know how much of this was passed on, but certainly it was eventually written up and made very big news in the 70s and afterwards. And the more stories you hear about Holmesburg and other incidents like this, you are very, very right to be skeptical about experiments, about doctors. Some of them may be very dedicated and very doing good work for many years, but that's what has been introduced into the real world because so many different groups and peoples have been abused and used and either maimed for life or killed. And yes, there is skepticism over there in Africa, and it's not the first time. There, I'm sure, are still many Africans who think that the rise and growth of HIV and AIDS may have been introduced by doctors doing experiments over there. And yes, you can criticize some of these people for not being educated, not being knowledgeable, being too fearful. But, the problem is there are too many examples you can point to where some really atrocious negative things took place that should not have. And that all ends up breeding this sort of cynicism and fear and distrust of the medical community.
And the profit motive as well, even when it's not as sinister as what happened at
That's right.
That's
right. Some of your top doctors were desperate to do experiments, whether they wanted to just publish an article in a medical journal, which has a lot of prestige in that community, or they wanted to develop something with a major medical or industrial firm. They needed test subjects. And you weren't going to go to the Junior Chamber of Commerce. You weren't going to go to the string section of the New York Philharmonic. You weren't going to go to the backfield of the Baltimore Colts or what have you. You were going to go where you had people who were basically the flotsam and jetsam of society. People who did not have connections, they did not have money, they were not educated, and therefore you could round them up and start doing things to them, and very few people would ask questions about it. And that's what just about every page of my most recent book, Against Their Will, underscores. How many doctors, famous doctors, who were out to fight polio, to fight cancer, to fight other diseases, went to the institutions that held young children, many of these children back then called feeble-minded, called idiots, called morons, and the doctors felt very comfortable injecting them with things, rubbing things on them, doing all sorts of things that we would find horrendous and blow our stack out today went on wide scale back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And they got away with it. They published their articles. They made their contacts with the big drug firms. They made big money, and they're written up today as great scientists. And some of them did do some wonderful scientific things, but we don't tend to see those who were burdened with those experiments, those who were used like lab rats, and in some cases seriously damaged.
Context of White Supremacy, again, author Mr. Alec Hornblum, also, unfortunately, one of the victims in these torturous, quote-unquote, experiments, Mr. C.O.W.S. Anthony. If any of our listeners have a question you would like to ask Mr. Anthony or Mr. Hornblum before they exit, definitely feel free to dial in. The number 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943 #. Press *6 if you have a question for either of our guests. If you would like any additional information on the books we've been discussing, you can go to Mr. Hornblum's website. It is www.hornblum.com. That address again, www.hornblum.com. It's HORNBLUM, Hornblum.com. You can get more information and see all of his publications. With all of the folks that, unfortunately, the victims in these studies in Holmesburg, when Acres of Skin came out and there started to be these community meetings where some of the folks, the survivors, were getting together and talking about what happened to them, how did you focus and select Mr. Anthony out of all of the folks that you came in contact around this work?
Well, as you correctly point out, I met him after the book came out. I was trying to track down as many inmates and doctors as I could. One of the things that was truly interesting early on was that the inmates were willing to talk to me and the doctors wouldn't. The inmates, and I would track them down to places on the street if they were out of prison, or I went to various prisons if they were still locked up to get their stories. And what was so interesting about this is the inmates told me some really chilling stories, but never really knew what the hell they were testing or being exposed to. Then when I got to the doctors, they knew what went on, but were scared to death to talk. Some of them would hang up on me. Some of them would curse me out. Some of them would plead with me not to reopen this. They would admit that they've been running from this for 25, 30 years. Some would say they'd only talk if they had a lawyer present.
Wow.
So it was just so interesting to see that the victims, the test subjects, were willing to talk, but were ignorant of what was really going on. The doctors who knew were scared to death to talk and just wanted to freeze me out. And fortunately, I did run into a few doctors who opened up, but what was most helpful were the Freedom of Information documents that I got from a whole host of different agencies that were, to some extent, keeping track of what was going on at Holmesburg. Mr. Anthony was one of several hundred inmates who finally came forth and identified themselves in the groundswell of publicity that Acres of Skin received. Acres of Skin was featured on Good Morning America, the Evening News with Dan Rather, the BBC, Terry Gross's Fresh Air, all sorts of radio shows and newspapers around the country. And they would have these meetings, and the guys would open up and talk about things. And I met Ed Anthony, and he seemed a really serious, humble guy who was really put through the mill. And I started bringing periodically to my classes at Temple some of these men, because I was teaching courses on race, class, and gender discrimination. And I thought my research on Holmesburg and these experiments were very consistent with that course. And so I bring in some of these guys, and C.O.W.S. Anthony was one of them. And initially, he was scared to death, very nervous, had to take a whole lot of pills to do it, because when he remembered this stuff, he would cause him to get very nervous. He couldn't sleep. He would upset his stomach. It was just something he was trying to forget. But his story was so compelling because he had been on so many experiments, and it seemed that every one put him in the sick bay. You know, they really wrecked him. And so we became friendly. And I was getting invitations to speak at various universities and medical schools and civic groups and what have you. And I would bring Mr. Anthony on a number of these occasions. For example, we've been to Brown University 5 times, and Villanova and Penn State several times, and out to Seattle and what have you. And it makes for a very compelling historical presentation, if I say so myself, where I give the historical context of human experimentation in American history, and C.O.W.S. talks about his personal history as a test subject and how he was repeatedly used and abused, and how some of these initiatives wrecked him for the rest of his life. So I don't think you can get a more stirring, dramatic portrait of what medicine and research was like back in this period. I suspect that all of the Tuskegee syphilis study men are dead at this point. And generally you do not find test subjects giving talks on this, because, as I said, a lot of them were in bad shape. They were developmentally held back. They suffered from lots of problems, and that's why doctors went to these institutions, because they knew that they could get away with using them, and if something happened untoward, they really didn't have to worry about newspaper articles or a lawsuit or anything like that. So when I and C.O.W.S. come into a classroom or an auditorium, it really is a very impactful, unique presentation on what human research was like in post-war America.
Wow. The person that dialed in, last 4 digits 9756, if you had a question for Mr. Hornblum or Mr. Anthony, your line should be open. Do you have a question you want to get in? Call 9756, not hearing you. Did you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, great. I wanted to ask Mr. Anthony about his view on black people in America prior to when he went in prison versus today, in reference to how there's a lot of homosexual activity going on. I wonder if you think there's a connection between what was going on between black men in prison and the big explosion in homosexuality going on today. If there's any if you think there's any connection, if you've noticed any connection like that.
I don't know about connections out in the street. You know, I only know about what was going on in the prisons. You know what I mean? But I think the United States is suffering from homophobia. You understand what I'm saying? The president and everybody is sanctioning. It's no longer a religious issue. You know, of the great sin that it's supposed to be, where people, males is marrying males and females is marrying females out here in the world. But in jail, it was more or less a forced thing. You know? It was a forced thing, you know. Like I said, the guards turned their back on it and let it happen. Because the prison system was that corrupt. You know what I mean? But as far as like homosexuality running rapid in this country outside of the jail, hey, I don't know nothing about that. They got that. You know, I'll be watching on TV where the president and the government and all these people is sanctioning for people to go ahead and get married like that. You know? in which it's corrupting society. It's corrupting society.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yes, sir.
Wow. I didn't see any other hands. I'm assuming we got all the folks who had a question. I guess before we transition, I guess Mr. Anthony, I'll ask, you document very open about your problems with substance abuse and drug addiction that caused a lot of problems and contributed to you ended up being incarcerated in the first place. There is so much talk right now, and it seems like a matter of time to me. And I'm in Washington State, where cannabis has already been legalized. It looks like that might be happening on a national level at some point. What are your thoughts, since you talk about being a teenager and using marijuana and spending a lot of time drinking and getting high at a very young age? Do you think legalizing cannabis, marijuana, do you think that will be something constructive for black people?
I voted yes for medical marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as far as like stuff that's out there in the streets that they're pushing and stuff, that's dangerous stuff, man. They get angel dust and all that kind of stuff. I don't sanction that. But as far as people using it for medical purposes, glaucoma, cancer, and stuff like that, I voted yes for that.
Okay. What about the non-medical aspect? Because out here it's beyond that. It's totally legal, so you could just do it in a recreational sense. What do you think?
I don't sanction any kind of recreational drugs, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I'm against that. I did what I did back in the past. Like I said, I'm 70 now. I'll be 71 tomorrow. You know, and I'm off of drugs. And the idea of using drugs as a recreation and stuff like that, I don't drink. The worst habit I got now is I smoke. You know, but as far as like people that are sick, truly suffering, you know, I voted for to legalize medical marijuana. You know, yeah.
You don't think it would, if they legalized recreational use of marijuana, you don't think that would help keep some black people out of prison and that would benefit black people?
Well, you know, here in Philadelphia, they're trying to pass a law where you can get stopped with a certain amount in your possession and you don't have to go to jail.
Mm.
Yeah, that'll keep the jails from being overflooded, you know, but still it don't take away the type of violence that I see that's participating with people that's using it illegally. Yeah, I see guys getting shot, stabbed, and stuff, same old crap that was in the jail out here in the streets. But as far as like the legal thing where people have prescriptions from a doctor and they're going and getting the stuff from the doctor and bringing it home and smoking for medical reasons, like I said, I'm for that. But like here it is, they taking and drawing marijuana out here to sell it in the streets, and they're mixing all kinds of chemicals in it. You know what I mean? Formaldehyde and all this kind of crazy stuff. This sending people off. I know people that committed suicide from that angel dust stuff with the formaldehyde in it.
Wow.
You know, yeah, there should be some kind of a control over that. The thing, the free, how you say, the recreational part of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that recreational thing, man. They got that.
Fascinating. I definitely appreciate. That was something I was really looking forward to getting your perspective on that. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yes, sir.
I would definitely encourage folks, read it. It is fascinating. You get a lot of direct quotes from Mr. Anthony to get his perspective on what he experienced, what they did to him in these quote-unquote experiments. It's terrorism in my book because they didn't even do adequate scientific research. A lot of this stuff they didn't even check and make sure whatever they were supposed to be studying, whatever the results were supposed to be, to make sure that this was carried out in a proper scientific manner. That wasn't even happening in a lot of these cases. So in my opinion, it's just terrorism. But the book is
genocide.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, genocide. That's what it is.
Amen.
Yes.
The text is Sentenced to Science, One Black Man's Story of Imprisonment in America, written by Mr. Alan M. Hornblum, and the main subject, Mr. Yusuf Anthony. And if you really want to get more of a comprehensive understanding of the scope of all of this, I would definitely encourage folks to also read Acres of Skin. I've read that as well. Great book. Lots of great information. And check the footnotes. That's how I found some of the additional information. Make sure you go through, read the footnotes. You can go through and look through the bibliography section to see some of the sources where he got all the information. Just really important documents, in my opinion, Acres of Skin and Sentenced to Science. Thoroughly appreciated having both of you on the program with us this evening. It was grand to hear from the two of you, and hope it was a constructive investment of your time.
Yes.
Well, it was, and I want to thank you and commend you for bringing this issue to your audience. Not every talk show host, wants to deal with serious public policy matters and the history of this country. So I commend you for doing that, and look forward to talking to you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Hornblum. Mr. Anthony, do you want to?
Same here. I commend you, man, for doing this, man. Put yourself out there like this, and I thank you for having us.
The pleasure was ours, particularly for Mr. Anthony. I wish it could have been under better circumstances, but it sounds like you're doing better now. I'm definitely glad to hear that. I'm sorry about the compensation not working out, even though I'm not surprised, but definitely continue to take outstanding care of yourself, and we definitely look forward to speaking with both of you down the road.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Take good care.
Right.
Good evening. Context of White Supremacy. Woof. Just very important stuff, in my opinion. The text, and he, like I said, a lot of the second book I'm talking about, Sentenced to Science, it just has a lot of direct quotes from Mr. Anthony in the text, so you can just kind of get it directly from him, all of the heinous things that they did. You heard it directly from Mr. Anthony, genocide. And what they did, and even having CIA involvement in some of these studies. It's just gruesome, but I mean, hey, this is what it is, system of white supremacy. At any rate, unless folks, if you wanted to hear another little section maybe from the book, I can knock that out if anybody is interested. The Sentenced to Science, you can let me know, and I can read that before we wrap up. As I said, I feel obligated with so much going on in Ferguson to have our discussion to see what has transpired now that the National Guard has been brought in, and they did lift the curfew, unless that changed since the time that we went live. They were bringing in the National Guard, but there's supposed to be no midnight curfew. I think they're supposed to have a zone of protest, I think was the language that was used, where it's supposed to be a certain area where folks who are protesting, they can stay there, but they're not supposed to be outside of that particular area protesting. But that's supposed to be going on. I did get a very interesting audio clip where a friend, that's what she says. She says she's a friend of Darren Wilson, the white officer who killed Michael Brown Jr. This is a friend where she said she spoke with Darren Wilson's wife to get his side of the story, and she wanted to call in to get his perspective on what happened out, because she felt that the coverage had been biased in I'm trying to get away from that, adverse manner with regards to getting out Officer Wilson's perspective. So I want to play that because I thought that was very, very interesting as well. I also thought that they're supposed to convene the grand jury. I think they said Wednesday, so that should be in 2 days. The grand jury will convene to kind of review the evidence and see if there are going to be charges filed against Officer Wilson. They have already said that it's going to take a while because they said that this case was very complicated, so that they don't expect it to be as quick as their normal grand jury sessions. So that's something to kind of keep an eye out for as well. But we'll take a commercial break. If folks have any commentary that they want to get in on this, which you heard with Mr. Hornblum, Mr. Anthony, you should get your hand up first so we can knock that out. And then folks have things that they want to share about what's happening in Ferguson. We'll make our time for that before we sign off. We'll do the commercial first, and then I'll get the audio interview with, this is a white woman, right? She, again, says she is friends with Officer Wilson, and she says she spoke with Officer Wilson's wife, and she got his side of the story, so that's what you'll hear. So commercial first, and then you'll hear from this white woman's perspective on what happened in Ferguson. Context of White Supremacy. We will be right back.
RacismDaily.com, your number one source for global news reports on race, racism, and overt actions of white supremacy. From Asia to the Americas to Europe to Australia to Africa, racism is not a thing of the past. It is our current reality. Be informed. Be globally informed. You should be the first to know. RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com, RacismDaily.com.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Do you need a one-stop shop for all of your multimedia needs? Triumphant Multimedia is a skilled team of professionals with a passion for great marketing and chic design. Our specialties include consulting, brand development, copywriting, and creative graphic design that's second to none. We also offer photography, photo retouching, videography, and video editing. At Triumphant Multimedia, our goal is to provide highly effective creative solutions built to suit any individual need or budget. Give us a call at 678-732-8067 or check us out online at trimultimedia.com.
Hi everyone, welcome. This is Justice with the C.O.W.S radio program. If you want to learn about, understand, and counter racism, white supremacy, be sure not to miss a C.O.W.S episode. We keep them jammed, packed with constructive information to sharpen your use of words to help eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy, ASAP. Also, to be able to invest in my counter-racist efforts, co-hosting the C.O.W.S radio program, please visit my blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com.
You're just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
I got an uncle real crazy. My Uncle B, 55 years old, hates white people, married to a white lady. And he's sitting around going, these crackers ain't shit, except for Susan. And he tried to explain the whole thing to me one day, say, yeah, I got a white wife, I love her, she loved me, that's all that matters. But I tell you this, if the revolution ever come, I'll kill her first. Just to show these crackers I mean business. Motherfucking cracker ass, motherfucking cracker. Shit cracker, motherfucker. Hey, hi, honey. Motherfucking cracker, I'll kill my cracker kids too.
FM News Talk 97.1. On-demand audio.
I want to go to the phones and take this, and I don't know, this is the person on the line. It says Josie on my call screener, but she's been identified, and I had our call screener talking to her as a friend of Darren Wilson, the officer that was involved in this. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you very much.
So just give me, you said that you're a friend of the officer that was identified by the police as being involved in the Michael Brown situation. Give me your aspect on this, because your friend's name, this officer's name is out there. Talk a little bit to this.
Okay. Well, it's been really, really hard to be quiet because I do know his version of the story, and I haven't seems like everyone only is talking about the other side. I understand they haven't really gotten to hear this side. And I've been afraid to say anything. I think we all are, all of his friends and family. But I just feel like I at least need to put out there his version of events so maybe people can consider them as the truth, if nothing else.
Okay.
So do you want me to kind of run down?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So he said that, they were walking in the middle of the street. He rolled his window down and, said, come on, guys, get out of the street. They refused to and were yelling back and saying, we're almost where we're going. And there was some cussing involved. And then he just kept rolling up and he pulled over. And I believe at that point he called for backup, but I'm not sure. But I know he pulled up ahead of them and he was watching them. And then he gets the call in that there was a strong armed robbery and they give the description. And he's looking at them. They got something in their hands that looks like it could be what, those cigars or whatever. So he goes in reverse back to them, tries to get out of his car. They slam his door shut violently. I think he said Michael did. And then he opened his car again, tries to get out. And as he stands up, Michael just bum rushes him, just shoves him back into his car, punches him in the face. And then, of course, Darren grabs for his gun, and Michael grabs the gun. At one point, he's got the gun totally turned against his hip, and Darren, shoves it away, and the gun goes off. Well, then Michael takes off with his friend. They get to be about 35 feet away, and, Darren, of course, protocol is to pursue. So he stands up and yells, freeze. Michael and his friend turn around, and Michael starts taunting him, oh, what are you going to do about it? You're not going to shoot me. And then he said all of a sudden he just started to bum rush him. He just started coming at him full speed. And so he just started shooting, and he just kept coming. So he really thinks he was on something because he just kept coming. It was unbelievable. And then so he finally ended up, the final shot was in the forehead, and then he fell about 2-3 feet in front of the officer. So that's why the stories are going around that, he was shot execution style. I think some people saw, the shot in his head. Of course, ballistics will prove he wasn't shot in the back like the other people are saying, the quote-unquote witnesses. But that's his version of what happened.
Now, can I ask, how did you come by this information? Is this something that did you have discussions with the family? How did you come to know the details of it?
With his significant other told me. It was before it was such a huge, it was Sunday night before the riot. So, it was when they were still on Facebook, everyone was still talking, it was kind of an open discussion at that point. I, of course, had no idea it would turn into this.
Right. And has his family, are they in town? Have they left town?
They have not been in contact with anyone since Tuesday morning.
Wow.
And
I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you calling in and giving that perspective. Thank you so much. Thanks for calling into the program.
You.
That individual is a person who claims that they were friends with the officer involved in the Mike Brown shooting, Darren Wilson. So that, and again, that the investigation will, when the investigation's concluded and the more details are released, earlier this morning the incident report was released, all of that's going to come out. What did they say it was going to take? Like, something like 4 weeks or so. What was it, 2 to 4 weeks?
I heard 2, so it's probably going to be over 2.
The toxicology.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I think I heard 2, maybe 4. So 2 to 4 weeks would be a good number to tell.
Now, see, that's going to be really interesting, that toxicology report, too. And I know, and that, to me, and everyone's like, why would they do that? Because it's standard. That's why they do it. There are a lot of people who are like, well, you're reinforcing stereotypes. No one is. That's standard. They do toxicology reports. And in fact, every single friend that I've ever had any death in that way, or when a young person passes away, they do those. I've seen them done quite a lot, or I've been aware that they have been done. Not like I actually saw them do it. So that's, it seems kind of standard. But that was an interesting account. I mean, if, and I don't know, that caller said that they were friends with Darren Wilson and, speaking to their significant other, and that's how she got those details. You always have to be very careful in situations like that. You don't want to say, oh, that definitely was a friend, or it definitely, but I know that it'll be interesting to see if, when the investigation concludes, if all of those details that she just gave, if that matches up with what comes out of the investigation. So anyway, we'll that's very.
Context of White Supremacy. I'm going to make sure I give out my recommendation again. The book Male Rape, a casebook of sexual aggressions, Anthony M. Scacco. And if you don't want to read the whole book, if you just want the one chapter, Racial Factors in Prison Homosexuality. Woo! Fascinating read, where you have a white man saying, yes, some of this homosexual behavior is a response to racism. Anywho, so the audio that you just heard, she went by the name Josie, white woman. She is allegedly friends with the Wilson family, Darren Wilson, the white officer who killed Michael Brown. That is her, allegedly that's supposed to be her giving his perspective, his side of the events that unfolded that led to Michael Brown being killed. This just came out today. I don't know how folks are responding to it. I am of the opinion, as I said yesterday, that toxicology report, when it comes out, I think that's going to be another masterful campaign. I don't know if, anything was in his system. I haven't heard anyone say that they were drinking or consuming any other substances, any intoxicants before all of this happened. But if that toxicology report comes back and it's not clean, people have been talking about the vilification of black people, same thing that you just saw play out with Renisha McBride, where they said she was some superhuman ogress who had Theodore Wafer in fear of his life, and she rattled the house, knocking on the front door. You're going to see the same thing play out. I hope nothing was in the system, but, man, I've been hearing people already talking about that, and they already have been suggesting, well, they were getting those cigars, and maybe they were going to roll something up, and, ooh, that is one. I just see that continued vilification, particularly her saying that he charged him. I think he was on drugs. She said it. I think he was on something. He charged him and was so aggressive. She even said bum rush. I didn't even know they still used that. That I haven't heard anybody use that term in eons. But he charged Officer Wilson. So aggressive. Bum rushed him. I feel like I've heard this scenario repeatedly, over and over and over again. That's why you end up with someone, Kerry Ball, the other black male who was shot and killed in St. Louis. Nobody knows his name, where he got shot 25 times in 2013. That's one huge aspect, at least for me, that is standing out. I think it is also interesting. I'm seeing the Voltron effect commence. I mean, that's all day, every day, but I'm seeing it congeal and grow stronger as this goes along. I put on my Facebook page, I think I tweeted it too, where white people had a rally yesterday in Ferguson in support of Officer Wilson and the police department, Ferguson Police Department in general. And they have set up a GoFundMe account for him, and they had buckets out to raise money for him, to support his family. And we're saying, oh my gosh, the coverage has just been so negative and biased against Officer Wilson, making it seem like he did something wrong. This is a decorated veteran of our police department. He's never done anything wrong. We should always support police officers. I think he did the right thing. We should just be patient and allow this process to play out without vilifying him and acting as though we have a racist enforcement department. What they shared yesterday, it's reminded me of what happened when Trayvon Martin was shot and killed, how you got $250,000 raised for his murderer to support him and make sure that he had money to take care of whatever ailments and things were happening all the way through his trial. I've seen all of this before. It is just fascinating. I don't know what other material folks have seen. I didn't really get an opportunity to like check out what was happening on CNN through the course of today. I did watch last night. I know there was they reported further disturbances. They said shots were fired and all of this. They keep saying that there was a Molotov cocktail, and I almost went back to get that clip. This was in July. They had two black people on. Lester Spence was one of them. He's a former guest on our program, but they were just citing, points where they didn't agree with the President Obama's "My Brother's Keeper," right? And they weren't acting wild. They weren't yelling. They weren't calling him any names. They were just, some of it was saying that they felt it should have included black females, and then more of it was just, I don't think it's going to be very effective, period. I don't think whatever else they wanted, but they just felt it was not strong enough for the problems that we black people are facing. At any rate, it was a white guy, John Hockenberry, on The Takeaway. He was doing the interview, and he said, "Oh, wow, you all are on the verge of throwing some serious Molotov cocktails at President Obama's program." And I said, now, see, that right there, that's the way that we think these guys, or it was a male and a female, these people are professors, scholars. They have graduate degrees. I don't know what kind of degree, if any, John Hockenberry has, but I still think of you as a looter. I think of you as somebody running around in the street, breaking windows and throwing Molotov cocktails when you're just giving a scholarly analysis of the president's program, paying attention to words. Same thing, but with those the allegations of a Molotov cocktail, several people pointed this out. I think I tweeted some of the comments where they were saying, with all of the cameras that are in Ferguson right now, all of the mainstream outlets, they were there last night. They had their cameras out, the whole nine. This has been the case for at least a week now. You would think there would be at least one image, a photograph, a video, a screenshot, something, if black people were throwing Molotov cocktails in the streets of Ferguson, where you have a curfew in effect, and they've already reported that there was quote-unquote looting at least twice already. You would think there would be some evidence to show, see there, hooliganism, this is not peaceful. They're out burning up stuff and committing acts of violence against officers. Not one image. I have not seen one. I haven't seen one tweet. I was watching the video coverage last night. They said the disturbances they reported started well in advance of the 12 a.m. curfew yesterday, and then things continued on through. I watched a lot of the news coverage until very late in the evening, on up through it was morning when I stopped watching, morning in St. Louis when I stopped watching, and I did not see one image, photograph, video, nothing. I think that is suspicious, and because they had said earlier last week that a black person, that there was a police officer hit by a Molotov cocktail. Now, this time they had an image. But for me, the significance was that, number one, it was the same image that they kept showing over and over. And if you've seen a Molotov cocktail, right, you have a bottle, you put some sort of flammable liquid in it, and you have like a rag or whatever that you light, and then you throw it, it breaks, the solution gets everywhere, the fire catch, boom. It looked like there was maybe an ounce of fluid in this bottle. If anyone saw, I think this was maybe last Tuesday or Wednesday, I think, when this happened. But it looked like there was maybe an ounce of fluid in it. And it just kept showing the same image over and over. And they said that the Molotov cocktail was thrown at an officer. It hit him in the head, and he wasn't injured because he had his riot helmet on. But that happened, and that prompted aggressive actions by the police. And I just said, man, I keep coming back. That's one thing Melissa Harris Perry on her program where she said, well, she didn't say it. It was one of her black guests said, agent provocateurs. And I thought that was very appropriate. I thought that was one of the most important things that I heard during the broadcast. It is so easy for white people to direct, pay, instruct a black person, any non-white person, to go out and do these sorts of things. Go out there, here's a Molotov cocktail or whatever. Here's a brick. Go throw it at that building. Go rob that liquor store and make sure you wait till the cameras. It is super easy for that to happen. Now, I don't have any evidence that is taking place, but I know there's documented evidence that has happened before, and it would be easy to have that sort of thing happen now, where you just get, and it wouldn't even take a lot, 5, 10 individuals to go out and do this, and you got it. You can already use that to sway the way that people will think about and talk about these events. Maybe that's not the case, but I definitely think that's something that we should all keep in mind as these events unfold. If there are folks, if you all have comments, like I said, I didn't really get to see as much about things that were happening during the middle of the day, and now that it's evening there, I haven't been able to see as much about what's happening like live time. I did see a report where an enforcement official got aggressive with Don Lemon. Folks know, right? Don Lemon, CNN reporter, black male. He's been in Ferguson for a while now. I just tweeted it out where I guess I don't know what he was doing, but the officer apparently got a little rowdy with him for whatever reason. So it looks like interesting things are still going down there. If folks have any observations, things that they've seen that they would like to share, or about the audio clip that you just heard, you can feel free to dial in. Let's see, the person at 4300, did you have a question, comment, 4300?
Oh, good evening to the listeners, to the host. I just thought it was interesting how this woman, she didn't know enough to speak on behalf of the race soldier, but she felt that it was her appointed duty to speak on behalf of the race soldier. Additionally, I found a report that was on USA Today, and I'll just read it really briefly. St. Louis County law enforcement agencies received 12 5.56 millimeter rifles and 6 45 caliber pistols from the Department of Defense between August 2nd, 2010 and February 13, 2013. This was part of a Pentagon. The Pentagon allowed information on tactical equipment to be released only at a county level. So this was part of a program. A media relations chief at the Defense Logistics Agency confirms that the Ferguson Police Department is part of a federal program called 1033 that distributes hundreds of millions of dollars of surplus military equipment to civilian police forces across the United States. The materials range from small items such as pistols and automatic rifles to heavy armored vehicles such as the MRAPs used in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it sounds like this was something that they had been preparing for, and maybe they just needed some event to kind of incite some type of justification for bringing in military power. I don't know. It's just an observation.
Mm-hmm. I think white people, they pretty much are always looking for any sort of excuse to get aggressive in a violent manner with black people. I know my pal Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! They were echoing the sentiment that you just read in that report about how you have all these police departments with military weapons and what have you. But they were saying this has been going on for a while. That they've been doing this for decades now. I mean, they were tracing this back to the early '90s, maybe even when George Bush the first was president. That this has been the norm in terms of supplying local police departments with military-grade weapons, which, again, I think our caller in Florida had said that seems to be standard operating procedure for dealing with black people, like looking for an excuse, as you said, to pull out all their toys. Like, oh, they're getting, look, get the tanks. Let's get the, just drop of a dime. Like they look like they might be getting out of hand. We got to go and put them down. Like, in fact, for all the folks that have been talking about what's going on in the summer of 1963, 1964, 1965, if you go back and look at some of that footage, caller in Florida had said, Bull Connor, they had tanks in Birmingham, Alabama. And even in Mississippi, what they call Freedom Summer, where James Chaney and those two white boys were killed, in the documentary, they have footage where they were talking to I guess it was the police commissioner down in Mississippi, and he was bragging. Like they had, he said, we got this brand new tank, and folks can get in and they can shoot out and boom, 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 and all this. Like, it was just crazy. Or I shouldn't say it was racist. But I mean, they were bragging about how much equipment they had, really military-style equipment they had in preparation for folks coming down who were really just trying to teach and register voters. But that seems to be, unless I'm in error in my perception, but that just seems to be standard operating procedure for white people. Just they are ready to be at military operations at the drop of a dime as it relates to black people.
Yeah, and I had the very same thought that you did when the woman was talking about how these two young men were getting aggressive with the officer. I thought the same thing as far as this sounds just like the Trayvon Martin case all over again. And so that's what they do. They try to make the victim appear to be the perpetrator, and they have a very good way of justifying everything that they do. So I guess, I don't know, we have to figure out some type of strategy to deal with this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I said, I made my comment yesterday where, at least for right now, I'm of the opinion that I do not think Officer Wilson is going to be charged with anything in this case. And I know for a lot of folks that, seems like, that's impossible, and, they would continue to riot, they'd burn the city down, and blah, blah, blah. Just from what I've seen and how things have progressed, I think, the default, in my opinion, the default should be, if there is a trial, he will be exonerated. Like, he's certainly not going to jail. That should just be the default. It should be an surprise if, like when Theodore Wafer gets convicted, that should be a surprise. Like, wow, I can't believe that happened. But just in this case with the photos that they released on Friday, and the way that they are talking about the protesters and saying that they're violent and hooliganism, that sort of thing, I just, and even in bringing in the National Guard and what have you, I just, in my opinion, I think they're going to be able to do a successful job of just having white people be on the same page, as you heard from quote-unquote Josie, that Michael Brown, he charged him, he was defying this officer, he had already committed a crime, a robbery, a strong-arm robbery, and this was warranted. This was justified. We just can't have black people getting sassy with an enforcement officer and fighting back. We just can't have that. This was a justified shooting, tragedy all around, but Officer Wilson committed no crime. Here. Like, I feel like that's the way that they're gonna take this case. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but that is my assessment for right now. I'll monitor if I change my opinion at any point down the road.
No, I think your opinion is spot on, and it just makes me think of Mr. Fuller and what he says. We are in war, and so many of us don't realize that we are in war. And not only are we in war, but we are prisoners of war, and we need to act like it. So, to a degree, as far as the aggressive behavior, that's all subjective. He's a police officer. If the young man asked a question or he made a comment, that's going to be translated as aggression because he's an officer, he's an authority figure, and he's black. So it's all left up to interpretation, and so it's just anything. So I think that parents have to really better train their kids. We have too many black people have this delusion and illusion that we do live in a colorblind world, and we don't. And so until we really learn and understand our status as prisoners of war, these types of things are going to continue to happen.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I hope folks can highlight what she just said about it continuing to happen. I had that thought when I watched Melissa Harris Perry's program from yesterday because people were talking about that. I'll save that for later because I had another audio clip. But, yeah, I totally agree. I'm not exactly as you said, that being quote-unquote aggressive, that's very subjective in terms of what that means. Definitely if you are a black person, anything, if you bat your eyelids too hard, oh, my God, it's being, we hear that all the time, people saying that on the workplace and what have you. So that's, unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with under the system of white supremacy. From what she said, it's hard for me to imagine a black person telling a police officer, you're not going to shoot me, what are you going to do? You're not going to shoot me, and charging an officer. Like, that is kind of difficult for me to believe. Like, I've seen black people do some wild things and, being involved with enforcement officers. I think some of our listeners have even said that, when they were more confused, they did some pretty wild things that could have maybe even resulted in them being killed. And, that definitely is not the way to go. But it's kind of hard for me to imagine an 18-year-old yelling that at a police officer. You're not going to shoot me. What are you going to do? What? And charging that person, that just does not seem in the realm of possibility for me. But, I could be in error. We will see how all of this plays out. And for me, that's another reason I reject all of that nicknaming. People have been calling, this started with Eric Garner, where they were calling him the gentle giant. And with Michael Brown, I've heard the same thing, and calling him Big Mike. I reject all of that because I feel that just fits into that narrative of a big, aggressive, scary black person who would definitely warrant lethal force, certainly aggressive and violent force, and lethal if need be, because this is Big Mike. This is a giant that we're dealing with. I reject all of that. His name is Michael Brown Jr., not Big Mike. His name is Eric Garner, not the gentle giant. Just call people by their names. And I also feel like that's that trope of nicknaming black people. We've been talking about that in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and calling black people everything other than their parent-given name. So that's one thing that I'm doing. I would recommend that as well, to not get in all that nickname stuff, Big Mike and all that other stuff. Just call the people by their name. Michael Brown Jr., Eric Garner. Leave it at that. They don't need any extra nicknames, and certainly nothing to suggest that they are a big, burly, aggressive, highly melanated black person. I'm trying to think. I didn't get to see it yet. I'll watch it once the program ends. If anybody had seen exactly what happened with Don Lemon, why this enforcement official got aggressive with him. But anybody had any observations about what has unfolded? I think it should be dark there by now because it's 9:40. With the National Guard being in place and what that looks like. I haven't been in front of a TV screen to see how all of that is unfolding. I do know I saw that they released the autopsy report and said that he was hit 6 times, if my memory is accurate, and they were all upper body shots. These looked, I think people would say these look like shots where you're shooting with lethal intent. He was hit, I think, twice in the head and upper arm area and what have you. And I think they even said from the autopsy report they released in the New York Times that the shot was going down into his head, and they were trying to explain how that could be. And they said that could be the result of him being on his knees, or it could be the result of him having his head down and charging at the officer. Those were the explanations they gave as to how a bullet could be at a downward angle, downward trajectory into Michael Brown's head. So that's also something to keep abreast of. I think I put that on my Facebook page as well, the autopsy report that was released from the New York Times. I think Attorney General Eric Holder, in addition, he's supposed to be going to Ferguson too, but I think they already said that they're going to do a second autopsy on Michael Brown Jr.'s body to see, what additional evidence that they can secure to add to their own investigation of what happened here. But I thought that was interesting. And I think the other report they released that the shop owner from the stills that they put up on Friday about Michael Brown shaking the sky, the quote-unquote strong-arm robbery, the shop owner said that he didn't consider it that big a deal and that he did not call the police. He said that one of the customers called the police. And I thought that was pretty significant as well. I know people had different thoughts and opinions around that in terms of if that's true, that information should have been released immediately. Like he was killed almost 10 days ago, that information should have been released like within the first 48 hours. That the shop owner, because that was rumored. It's not like this just came out. That was rumored and stated pretty early on in all this. He should have said that pretty early. That, hey, I didn't think this was any big deal. I didn't think there was a quote unquote strong arm robbery. I didn't even call 911. A customer called 911. But that did come out today, and I think that just added further to people saying that they felt that the enforcement officers were not being truthful about how things unfolded, and they're just trying to besmirch Mr. Brown and have people think of him as a thug criminal who deserved death. And certainly Officer Wilson should not be punished for killing someone who was not worthy of life. Could be an error. Any other thoughts folks had? Right on. Like I said, I know everybody is adding their 2 cents in around this, hopefully adding some constructive commentary on racism, white supremacy. I did watch Melissa Harris Perry's Sunday show. I normally try to watch her program anyway to see what they're talking about. Racism comes up on a regular basis, but, I watched it yesterday because I had several listeners say that they felt she was very accurate, that she really did a great job of calling things what it was, and she seemed angry. She was really on point in her dialogue from Sunday. Now, I think I had not been able to watch the last 2 segments, so unless something really wild popped up there, I feel like I've watched enough of it that I can get I can give commentary on what happened. And I am going to watch those last 2 segments once the broadcast concludes today. But I watched it, and my thoughts, and I don't have criticisms of her. She's a victim of racism too. But just when I watched it and I saw what other people they said, where it seemed like she was upset, it seemed like she was angry in talking about all of this, and certainly you're a human being. You're justified in being angry. But what I posted on my Facebook page was, I don't know how angry or surprised one can be about a police officer, an enforcement officer, killing a black person. That happens on a daily basis. They released that report 2012, right after Trayvon Martin was shot and killed, that this happens about once every 28 hours. And I said then, I think that's probably a low estimate. I think it probably happens a little bit more frequently than that. But, even if we go off that, fine, every 28 hours, this happens too frequently, at least in my opinion, to sit around and be like, oh, my God, I'm outraged. I'm disgusted. I'm not going to take – this has happened again since Michael Ferguson. The show that I watched, they didn't even mention Ezell Ford. Now, maybe I haven't watched the Saturday program yet, so maybe they brought that up Saturday. But this happens all the time. There was a black female in Arizona who was killed just within the last 3-4 days since Michael Brown's death. And I think quite a few people saw they just released that in Louisiana, the New Orleans Police Department. They killed a black person, a black male, and didn't even release the information about this. Killed him, a couple days ago, what have you, and didn't even, bother to report that this had happened. This happens all the time. And just for me with the emotion, it takes me back, Neely Fuller Jr., when he was on the program, it was in response to Troy Davis when he was executed 2011. And he said people getting all worked up and in a tizzy and that whole nine. Black people are dying by the thousands every day worldwide. This is happening all the time. To get really worked up and all hyper and emotional about one black person being killed. Not that that's not a tragedy, but that's just what racism, white supremacy is. Black death in massive numbers all over the planet every day. That's what it is. And you really have to get to a point where you're not, at least in my opinion, where we're not responding with that sort of emotion. In fact, I'm of the opinion, I think we will really start to make some progress on this when it gets to that point where I understand there is a problem with regards to white people and white supremacy. I understand that. I understand that on August the 7th, 2 days before Michael Brown was shot and killed. I understand that. I'm focused on it. I'm dedicating as much of my time and energy as I possibly can to solving this problem. I'm not angry. Nothing acute happened. When we have that sort of focus, all those people that are upset and writing about this and mad and talking about this and protesting and all that, if those people can have that same focus on this problem that produces the Renisha McBrides, the Michael Browns, the Eric Garners, the Ayanna Stanley Jones, the Sean Bells. You can just run the name list all the way down. If people can have that same sort of focus when, hey, nothing bad happened to me today. I didn't get fired. No white person insulted me on my job. No white person called me a nigger today. I didn't see a report about an unarmed black child being gunned down in the street. None of that. I had a great day. I went to the beach. I spent time with my mom, with my family. I got to hang out and have a great time with my children, did some constructive work, got a little exercise in. It was fantastic. It was sunny, got outside and got that vitamin D. Wonderful day. And I still understand that we have a problem. There's a war being waged against us, and I'm going to be dedicating some time to working on that too. When we have that sort of focus, bang, that's when we'll make progress. I'm of the opinion like these acute moments of getting really upset and really angry and very emotional about these acute incidents, I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think it's sustainable just to say that I'm angry, because you can't be angry every day. I've never seen anybody who can just sustain being angry about the same incident, the same thing. I mean, it dissipates. You've seen that. I think anybody who has been angry about something, it dissipates. You can't stay angry about something forever. I don't think we're going to be able to solve this problem from an emotional basis. And I think even that's been discussed before as well. White people, they go hard practicing racism, and they don't have to have any emotion about it at all. That white guy can sit on that bench, Trayvon Martin's killer, it was a white female there. Get that in. White female can sit on the bench, Trayvon Martin's killer, you're free to go. No emotion. I'm not mad. I'm not calling anybody nigger. I'm not cursing. Yeah, going to get a pedicure, chilling, and practicing racism, white supremacy hard. I feel like we can be way more effective, logical, methodical when we get to that point where it's not operating from emotion. That being said, specifically with Melissa Harris Perry's show, and just my thoughts, because I did come up on the program. I'm not criticizing her. She's a victim. I don't, have anything bad to say about her. Just watching her show from Sunday, she had quite a few white people on. I thought that was interesting, and I can just play my clip. This kind of sums up what I thought in watching this segment, and then I can give my thoughts afterwards. If anybody has any thoughts, they can chime in before we wrap things up. But this is from her Sunday broadcast, so yesterday, and the segment where she has two guests on to talk about Michael Brown Jr., Context of White Supremacy.
The people of Ferguson may feel embattled, but they are not alone. BuzzFeed reported Thursday the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, the Hispanic Federation, the League of United Latin American Citizens, and many others have submitted statements expressing solidarity with the people of Ferguson after Officer Wilson shot Michael Brown to death. The National Day Laborer Organizing Network, who organized the hunger strike in front of the White House this past April. You'll remember Cynthia Diaz, who subsisted on just water for 5 days in hopes that her mother would be released from a detention center. They were eventually reunited in May. Now, the National Day Laborers Organization's Marisa Franco is calling for solidarity in the aftermath of the police slaying of unarmed teen Michael Brown. Her Friday statement read, in part, quote, "As a movement that is fighting criminalization to stop deportations and detention, Latinos and immigrants have a duty to stand alongside those who have been fighting it far longer. On the streets of Ferguson, people have bravely sounded an alarm on the crisis of violence besieging the black community. As we defend our own families, we must answer the call not simply to be in solidarity, but because the problems our communities face and the solutions we seek are linked together." Joining me now from Phoenix, Arizona is Marisa Franco, leader of the National Day Laborer Action Network's Not One More campaign. Nice to have you this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
So why, tell us, is solidarity so important in this moment?
Well, in the immigrant rights community and the Latino community, we've been fighting a monster. We've been calling on President Obama to stop deportations, and that's a lot of work. But we don't think that's an excuse to stand idly as we see the attack happening on the black community. We know firsthand the danger of when police are given duties. We've seen firsthand the way that the border's been militarized, the way that prisons and jails are conveyor belts to deportation, and when police become deportation agents. And so we are gravely concerned when we see issues and situations like those in Ferguson and the many that come before, where police are taking matters into their own hands and becoming judge, jury, and executioner all in one. And so we think it is the least we can do to issue statements, and it's a first step in what is to come to be able to address this issue that is a crisis.
I was truly heartened to see your statement, that of other organizations, that of LGBT organizations like HRC and others, who clearly seem to recognize this question of belonging. Talk to me then about what you see as solutions that cross the borders of LGBT questions, of Latino questions around deportation and immigration reform, and for African Americans in communities fighting over policing. What feel to you like solutions that address those questions broadly?
Well, we're really interested in how can we, what we can bring is our experience in our sector. We saw deportations happening a year ago. This was an issue that was being talked about as economy, fruit and vegetables dying on the vine. And right now, the immigration debate is being talked about human suffering and deportations as the centerpiece. And we're here to say we've learned some particular things in our sector about what it means to try to fight and try to fight as if we're trying to win, and trying to fight as if we want Michael Brown to be the last person. We want his family to be the last ones to suffer from this tragedy. And so there's particular things, I think. One is that we need to really hear from the voices of people who are directly impacted, people who are survivors of police violence. I think hearing from women, black mothers, who have been on the front lines of having to teach their children about how to survive, and grassroots organizers like those in Ferguson and around the country who have been battling this for far longer. We think it's time to push those who claim to be our allies to demand that they be champions. This is not just one issue of a rogue cop or a mismanaged police department. This is a crisis. This is an epidemic. And we think that it requires us being flanked and having the back of the black community as they respond to this issue. And I think we need to try different things, because if we continue to do the same things, we're going to get the same results. We need to innovate and try different things to address this, because his life matters. His family should not be suffering in vain. And we need to fight as if this is going to be the last time.
Marisa Franco in Phoenix, Arizona, with such a simple and yet compelling idea. What if we decided that Michael Brown would be the last one? Thank you. Coming up, more on the community's response to a curfew in Ferguson, Missouri.
We are Mike Brown! We are Mike Brown! We are Mike Brown!
All right. So that was from on Sunday. Now, for me, that's not really a deviation from what typically goes down on her program, where they call it intersectionality.
Missouri Governor Jay Nixon's message yesterday was crystal clear when he declared a state of emergency.
Thought that was all done. All right. As I was saying, that's not really a deviation from what I typically see on her program. In my opinion, I think white people have been doing a phenomenal job at diluting discussions on white supremacy, racism, where they need to pull every possible thing that they can into the conversation so that we are not focusing on racism, white supremacy, white people. We got to talk about LGBTQI, gender nonconformists. We got to talk about immigration. We got to talk about white women's rights. Anything we can pull in to dilute this conversation so that we are not focused on racism, white terrorism, standard operating procedure. And I feel like that goes down a lot on her program, where they spend a lot of time talking about all of these other issues and then try to say that this too relates to or is the same thing, or the intersectionalities with racism, which I totally reject. There is one war on the planet. That war is the system of racism, white supremacy. And I think we talked about before in terms of these attempts to link the border situation with black people, and I've said flat out, I reject those comparisons. They are not accurate, and I think they are being done purposely. It's the same thing that they did with quote-unquote gay rights to try to say that this is the same thing that black people are experiencing. You should be on board with us, and trying to get black people to support all of these different issues, as opposed to, wait a minute, you're going to the most terrorized group of people on the planet and saying that they should be involved in everybody else's struggle except focusing on the problems that they are facing. We can't even protect our own children, much less run around and hop on every other issue that has no relationship, in my opinion, to black people. I could be in error, but that's something standard that I see, not just her program. That's, the vast majority of people that I hear talk about racism. You get a lot of that, where we got to make sure that this gets somehow diluted so that it is not just we're having exclusive conversation about white supremacy, racism, just that LGBT, that's like one on its own. I've said that consistently. Got to make sure we keep black and gay in close proximity. Got to find a way to wedge that in. I think just this coverage, like it's almost for me getting to the saturation point, like it did with Trayvon Martin, where you get a whole lot of people talking about one incident of racism, like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened, and this is so wild, and oh my goodness, and just it turns it almost into a circus where I just lose interest. Like, man, police kill black people every day. I have no idea why you all are acting like this is strange. I have no idea why you all are acting like this just became a problem that you wanted to focus on, when we just had Eric Garner, we just had Oscar Grant, we just had Sean Bell, we just had Ayanna. I mean, how many black people need to die before you all come out and do your circus act for a couple weeks, as long as this remains a hot item, and then it's back to business? And I feel like these different groups directed by racists, in my opinion, most likely, that they will come out and glom onto this just to distract, get some attention, dilute the conversation, and inject their concepts about other things black people should be thinking about that have nothing to do with ending permanently, once and for all, white terrorism. That was another, at least for me, another significant point. And then at the end, like her quote-unquote solution or her concept or way of thinking about this, Michael Brown is the last one. As I said, Ezell Ford, he is not the last one. This happened again many times over since that incident. I mean, it's just, in my opinion, it's absurd, and it's not even accurate in terms of how to think about solving this problem. In my opinion, if we're sincere about saying we really want to do something about this, I think it has to come from a place of truth and saying, hey, this happens every day, and you can be guaranteed this is going to continue to happen every day as long as the system of white supremacy in place. As I wrote weeks ago, this is a necessary, essential, and predictable component of this system. It's clockwork. I mean, as I said, Ezell Ford. In fact, I can even go to the article. This was just released. This is from the Times-Picayune. Man shot in head during traffic stop Monday. New Orleans Police Department never publicly disclosed the shooting. This just came out since Michael Brown was shot and killed. And I feel like we cannot lie about that. We can't dumb that down. We can't minimize that. We got to be truthful. They had Michael Eric Dyson. He's a victim too. I don't have any beef with him. But he was talking about this event, and he was, I guess, talking to white people. And he said, white people, the police are not going to kill your child the way that they did Michael Brown. And my response was, white people probably saw that and go, duh, nigger. And again, that's not to disparage them. They think of all of us as niggers. That's the way they think about Michael Brown Jr. But my point is, white people are not confused. I don't know what that is. It prompts a lot of the same cliche, incorrect responses. White people are not ignorant about this. That's not the problem. They understand that. They know they are not going to be treated like Michael Brown Jr. They know what this is. We are the ones that are confused about racism, white supremacy, and just making sure I don't stray. I did not see anything that was a significant deviation from what is typically offered on Melissa Harris Perry's show. Like I said, maybe something really outstanding happened in those last 3 clips, which I will watch, and if that's the case, I'll make sure to play those on our next broadcast. But I didn't see that, and I've already watched over an hour and a half of her 2-hour program from yesterday. But those are my thoughts, and so many people seemed really taken aback with the presentation and saying that she was so angry. And I did see that, but emotion doesn't do a whole lot for me. Anybody who is getting really emotional when talking about racism and white supremacy, I kind of tend to back up because I just feel like that is not sustainable to be angry every day in dealing with racism. Not that it's not human to have emotion in dealing with this problem, whether it's anger or sad or frustration, rage, whatever the case may be. But I don't think a methodical solution to the scientific white terrorism that you heard about at Holmesburg Prison, I don't think emotion is what's going to solve that problem. I think when we can get to that state of just realizing this is our task, this is our creator-given assignment, let's go about the business of solving that problem. I think that's when we'll start to make some progress in dealing with this. I could be in error, though. Did anything stand out? If you saw the whole segment or if you have thoughts from that clip, the folks that are on the line, I see one other person chimed in as well. Anyone have any thoughts? Ice cream truck.
Well, I think that, good evening, everyone. I think that white people are really calm because when they're about the business of practicing racism, white supremacy, I mean, that's just everything's golden. It's wonderful. Why would they be upset? It's just lovely. So I don't think that now when they are practicing, we will tend to get more upset. But I think if they saw something that was really that they would perceive as a threat to racism, white supremacy, then I just don't think they'd be that calm. I think that a police officer gunning down black people is something that is absolutely integral to the practice of racism, white supremacy. And if for some reason this man was punished for doing something that is so germane to that, I think they would lose it. I think they would absolutely lose it. A police officer being punished for practicing racism, white supremacy, and containing black people, they would lose their minds. They wouldn't be calm then. But so I think it's just a matter of what's going on at the time. And as far as Melissa Harris Perry, it wasn't so much that she was saying anything that I thought would be, absolutely, spot on truth for us. But I thought she was saying things that they would be very discomforted by. I didn't think it would affect us that much. I thought it would affect them that much.
Do you remember like an example?
Well, I think just saying that, just listing the black males in the way that she did, and saying, shot, unarmed. I mean, it's just there's not too much of a rebuttal you can give to that kind of attack. And I think that would make them very uncomfortable. It's just putting racism out there and just not prettying it up or giving them some, left, right wiggle room or something like that. I just don't think they'd be comfortable with that at all. So, no, I don't. It wasn't that she said anything that was so deep to us. It's just the way she said it left very little wiggle room, aside from the fact that it was racism and barbarism. And they would be uncomfortable.
Well, we know that this type of stuff happens every day, multiple times a day. But I have a question for both the host, the other caller on the line. Does anyone have any insight to why they bring attention to certain incidents and not to others? So we hear about the Michael Davis. We hear about, it's so many of them, I'm getting names mixed up now. We hear about the Eric Garners. We hear about the Trayvon Martins. We hear about Sean Bell. Why do you think that they bring certain incidents to our attention and not others or not all? Does anyone have any insight into that?
I do. It's kind of like with P.T. Barnum. The more witnesses you have, the more chance you have for that circus atmosphere. And so it's like the people he would put on display, the black people he would put on display would be like George Washington's nanny. So, like everybody knows about that, the potential for a wider audience is really great. So I think it's just enjoying the murder.
I think that's a big part of it too. I think Dr. Ursula Orr, she's the black professor at Arizona State University, who was slammed for what they called jaywalking a few months back. She studies racism. That's a lot of what her scholarship is on. But she has a report that's on the lynching photographs from the early 1900s and what have you, and what the value of those was to white people. And I emailed her and I was saying that I think all of these videoed incidents, like Eric Garner and Oscar Grant, and even what happened to her, even though she wasn't killed, and Maureen Pinnock, the black female who was savagely beaten by the California Highway Patrolman. I think that these videos now, I think they serve the same type of purpose for white people. It's almost like a snuff film that they can enjoy seeing black people being killed. Legal lynching, I think some people call it. I think that's definitely one. And I think what she was saying about why did some of these events get a lot of publicity and others don't, like Renisha McBride didn't get nearly as much attention as Michael Brown. I think incidences where they have video footage where a lot of people are going to see it, it's going to quote-unquote go viral, and people have YouTube videos and all of that, I think those incidents are much more likely for white people to spotlight those, and they can make it, they just end up turning into a circus environment. I'm of the opinion, I don't think this makes white people uncomfortable. It's been my opinion that white people, they seem to know how to handle these events very well. It's been so many of them, and I've never seen where the end result is adverse for the system of white supremacy. If you want to go all the way back to Rodney, there's been so many of them, Rodney King or Eleanor Bumpers or Michael Stewart or whatever era, Amadou Diallo from some years back. I've never seen where it has an adverse impact for them. Even I've seen that before where they just do a roll call of black people that got killed, who were unarmed or whatever the situation was. I've seen that before. I think they did that sort of thing some years back after the Amadou Diallo killing. And I think even more recently I'd seen some reports where they did that. They just kind of had a roll call and listed off all these people that had been killed. I don't really think that if anything, I think it could just be a signal to white people that system is working okay. Niggas are being shot and killed in the street. Nothing is being done about it.
It could be, but did that roll call have Melissa Harris Perry's platform?
Well, Spike Lee's "Do the Right Thing" has that. That montage after Radio Raheem, where they list all the black people that have been killed in New York. I would say that's a comparable platform. I think "Do the Right Thing" is widely distributed, celebrating its 25-year anniversary. I think that's a pretty sizable platform, and it's pretty much the same thing, a roll call of black people that have been killed by police. Most of those incidents, nobody was punished, nobody was jailed.
Makes sense. So what do you think the impact it's supposed to have on us? What's supposed to be the impact that it's supposed to have on black people? I feel I was a little confused, too, by the last report that you had played from Melissa Harris Perry, but it just kind of conjured up the idea that, whites come for us black people in the daytime, and they come for Latino people and every other non-white in the night. So that was kind of my rationale for why they had that intersection. But I totally agree with you 100% that, it's a deflection and a distraction away from what's really going on. But what do you think they're trying to signify to us? I think in some degree it's like, hey, we can do this all the time and we get away with it. But I feel like it's probably supposed to do something else to incite something in us. I don't know what it is, but does anybody have any insight onto what do you think it's supposed to do to us?
What is I want to ask you a question, but what does that metaphor mean, that white people come for black people in the daytime and they come for Latinos or whomever else at night? What does that mean?
I guess what the metaphor means is that a lot of times other people feel like blacks, universally, everybody sees that black people are the problem. and a lot of people distance themselves from us. I'm not saying that our issues aren't exclusive. I think black people's issues are exclusive, but I also think that there are a lot of things that we do have in common. You know, a lot of people talk about, whenever they talk about issues going on with so-called police brutality, they always talk about Black and Latino. They always put those two together. So it's just, they're very just white supremacists. They come for us all the time, but you rarely hear, in comparison to us, you rarely hear about incidents that happen with them. So that's really what it means, is that all of the attention, all the negative attention is on us. That's really what it means. And everybody likes to distance themselves from us. You know, at the end of the day, we're all non-white in regard to white people. So everybody has this idea that they're so much better and they can put their nose in the air when it comes to us, and they can distance themselves from us. So it's just in regard to that.
Okay. These incidents, I'm of the opinion, just because it has for me the same feel as the summer of 2013, and I just saw a lot of demoralized black people. That's what I remember from last summer, where black people were saying, my gosh, Trayvon Martin's killer is chilling. You know, he's living his life, doing his thing, and nothing. No jail time, no conviction, no nothing. Our life is worthless. My children, you know, they could be killed at any moment. Like, that's what I heard, I feel like, for the duration of the summer of 2013 from the end of that trial forward. And I feel like I'm hearing a lot of that now as well, in terms of the report that I played this past weekend, the black female saying, that's why I don't have any children. I did not want my black child gunned down in the street like an animal. I feel like I'm hearing a lot of that same sentiment, and particularly because it's been so many incidents that have been piling up, where it's almost just like black people are just feeling despondent to some degree. Not all, but I feel like I have been hearing that creep up again. Just black life is not bad. I think last summer when Questlove from The Roots, when he said, I'm quoting him, so you have to excuse the language, that's what he said. He said that, you know, I'm not shit. I think he either said, I'm not shit, or my life ain't worth shit. And his friend said, you didn't know that you weren't shit? And he said, yes, I knew that, but just being reminded of it with this whole Trayvon Martin thing, and just as a black person, that, you know, my life isn't shit. Like, that really stood out to me, to continue to hear that over and over and over again. And I feel like I see that playing out, as well as the anti-blackness, because it's been my experience. I know Dr. Welsing talked about this. When we get frustrated about being terrorized by whites and they amp up their abuse of us, it's been my experience, one of our default responses is to blame other black people. And I feel like I've heard a lot of that increasing over the past 5 days or so, whether people are upset with President Obama, they're upset with Al Sharpton, they're upset with Jesse Jackson, whomever. Just name the black person, and they're upset with them. They don't like what they're doing. They don't like how people are responding or not responding. Attorney General Eric Holder, I've heard a lot of that increase over the past 5 days, just in terms of the anti-blackness. And even one of our listeners, he wrote and he said, unfortunately, the murders of black people these past few weeks seem to have brought out the worst in many of us. Too many Black First, Hotep, Black Power groups I am a member of have been using more coons, Negroes, bed wenches, and niggers than Stormfront. Stormfront is an overtly white supremacist website. Who are we angry with again? Neely Fuller Jr. is looking more like a prophet every day. If he is still learning, he must have the brain capacity of Yoda. That was his comment. But that observation about that increase in name-calling and getting mad with other black people, I saw that last summer. I see that again. I think those are two key aspects of what this is supposed to produce. But I think you have to kind of see how this is going to play out with what goes down in Ferguson. But if I cannot imagine, I think as Carmen said, I cannot imagine this ending with Officer Wilson being incarcerated. Like, I do not see that happening at all. At the end of the day, I think this is going to end where he rides off into the sunset. he's still an enforcement officer, and black people are just left mad. And that tension, I think, is going to just turn to other black people. That's what I suspect is going to happen. I could be in error. I would also just, I guess, quickly throw in as well, since I think Melissa Harris Perry, she resides in the New Orleans area, they could have easily brought up the Danziger Bridge incident and what happened after Hurricane Katrina and the breach of the levees. There were many, many black people that were shot and killed, police officers, white enforcement officers committing some of these shootings, and I think quite a few of them got overturned. Even when they did have convictions, more than 2 or 3 of these officers, the convictions got overturned, and they got reinstated, and they got all the back pay from the time that they were not employed as members of NOPD. They got all that money back, and they're still out policing right now. That would be just another illustration of just how serious all of this is and how well white people are able to coordinate these sort of activities. But I could be in error, but that's my thought to answer your question. I don't know, Carmen, did you have a thought?
No, thank you.
Much appreciated.
Definitely be worth paying attention to kind of see how it all plays out in the end. But yeah, could be, and we have to see what happens with Melissa Harris Perry's show. Is she still on next week? If white people are upset with her, how they respond to that episode, even with the name call thing. I don't know if that was on the Sunday one because I didn't see it. So was that Sunday or Saturday where she did her roll call of victims?
I think that was Sunday, and I think it was Sunday. Yeah, I think so. And yeah, and that's when she called him a murderer too. I think they wouldn't appreciate that very much at all.
Huh. Have to see. I have seen before when Melissa Harris Perry has got in trouble, and people were calling for her to be fired when she made her comments about Mitt Romney. That's the time earlier this year when I remember she definitely got in trouble with white people for her comments where white people felt like she was saying that there was something incorrect about white people adopting black children. And she had to come out and give profuse, tearful apologies, and there was widespread commentary that she should be fired or suspended or whatever the case may be. I haven't seen that about her program this weekend, but I definitely could have missed it. Maybe that is out there. People are upset with her. If she called Officer Wilson a murderer or whatever, if people are calling for her to be fired or suspended, or she has to come out and cry again and apologize for upsetting white people. But yeah, I will finish the last 2-3 segments that I had from the Sunday program to see if anything else stood out of significance. Perhaps I'll watch the Saturday one as well, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Plus, she had a lot of white people on the program as well. I always feel like that kind of sets the parameter for how far it's going to go when you have a white person there, because it's almost like they're directly, indirectly co-signing that, this has been approved. You have a white person present, so we're signing off that, we will allow this to come out. And I feel like with these sort of events, I think white people, they even will permit a certain amount of outrage or emotion where black people will be allowed, non-white people will be allowed to get rowdy and talking about racism for a while. And I even feel like that's part of the entertainment for white people. It just becomes racial theater. That becomes a part of the show, if you will, the circus environment of it all. I feel like you had a lot of this happening with the killing of Trayvon Martin as well, the murder of Trayvon Martin. I think you had a lot of that as well. I could be in error, but I feel like I've seen this. I feel like I've seen this show before. Like they just do sequels. White people just keep doing the same thing over and over again. They just do sequels. I feel like I've seen this one before, and I know how it ends. But I hope I'm wrong. Maybe there'll be a better resolution this time. Unless folks had anything else they wanted to share again before we wrap things up.
Let's hope that the sales of those mini cigars don't go up, like Arizona iced tea and Skittles. That's all I'm saying.
Amen. 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 I did see, I'll make sure I get that, and I did see a report. This was published today. Ferguson police busted, attempted to defame shooting victim, blows up in their face, where they're saying that the stills that they released, where they said that Mr. Brown was robbing the store, that the video shows Michael Brown at the register paying for his cigars. I guess if we get the whole video. From observation, it looks as if he tried to buy more, but was then unable to afford it, hence why he left several packets on the counter. This prompted the store owner to come out from behind the counter and have a discussion with him, which prompted the shove witnessed in the full video. Whatever words were exchanged between the man in the video and the store owner, they were not considered very serious, as the store owner nor the employees did not report a theft at the store. According to the store's attorney, the owners were bewildered when the police approached them demanding the surveillance tapes. The store owners are now afraid of themselves becoming a target due to the Ferguson's PD attempt to tie their store to the fateful shooting, a gross abuse of police authority, one which now puts someone else at risk. Even if Michael Brown were a petty thief, this does not excuse the cold-blooded shooting death of the 18-year-old. Of course, the right wing took the robbery claim at face value and began labeling Michael Brown as a thug who did not deserve due process. Goes on from there, but you can read. And actually looks like a white person wrote this report, Nathaniel Downs, D-O-W-N-E-S, Nathaniel Downs. But yeah, folks can kind of keep an eye out some of the things that have been reported. If you saw Melissa Perry's broadcast over the past weekend, you have any thoughts on that? If I missed something, you can feel free to drop in an email. If you see any other reports, I guess that's my nightly duty now, to see what's going down in Ferguson with the National Guard being present. And I'm curious to see how these protest zones are going to work out, like how are they setting all of that up. But I will attempt to post the link so you can watch this live as things unfold this evening, if anything should go down. We should be back. Excuse me. I'm allegedly supposed to be camping Wednesday and Thursday, so we should have a few days off, but we will be doing the book club on Friday. We should have the compensatory call-in on Saturday. A white male should be here a week from today talking about white terrorism in Slocum, Texas. That's a whole nother story. I'll tell you all about that later, but that should be next Monday. Anyway, you can just check the Facebook page for other programs that we have over the next 7 days and what have you, but I will definitely be abreast of what's happening down in Ferguson. Folks that are listening in that area, remain as safe as possible. Thanks all of the folks who tuned in. I hope it was of constructive value, not a waste of your Monday evening. If you get confused, need any information, have questions, feel free to drop me an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. You can also hit me on Twitter @untiljustice, @untiljustice. Thanks again for listening in. We will be back soon. Creator, we ask that you help all of us remain patient with other black people, other victims of racism. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Help us use these tragic events to educate our offspring, other victims of racism, white supremacy, about the problem we face on this planet: racist child, racist woman, racist man. Nourish our spirits. Help our ancestors remain in touch with us to inspire us, nourish us, aid us in moving forward and not being discouraged. Our goal is to be efficient, productive, counter-racist soldiers. We cannot afford to put our heads down on the battlefield. We have an assignment. Help us remain steadfast, dedicated, motivated in completing our objective permanently. replacing white supremacy with justice. It has been time. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.